Hi there, investigators. It's time to uncover the truth behind another case. The case of Kenneth Keith. Michael Hockensmith, 35, was born in Danville, Kentucky. He was a well-known pastor at a local church where he lived. After working at the church for a long time, he decided to work at a local pawn shop called ABC while continuing to work as a part-time pastor. After a while, due to the previous owner's health issues, Michael had to take over the entire pawn shop. Being an honest and helpful person, he easily connected with people. In his personal life, Michael was married to Angela, and the two had 2 children together, Andrew and Naomi. Michael and Angela jointly owned the ABC Gold, Games and More pawn shop in Danville, Kentucky. They homeschooled their 9-year-old son Andrew and took care of their newborn daughter Naomi. Andrew often visited his parents' workplace and considered it his playground. However, on the morning of September 20, 2013, the Hockensmiths went to the ABC store. The morning went as planned. Dan Smith, a regular at the pawn shop, made a scheduled visit. Smith, known as the Gold Man, was known for buying and selling gold between pawn shops across the state. About 15 minutes after opening, as Michael and Smith were making their transactions, a bearded man entered the store and ordered everyone to get on the ground, followed by horrific events. Andrew, who was at the ABC store at the time, after being instructed by his mother, Angela, to hide, noticed the tense situation and quickly called the police to report the situation. 6 minutes after the alarm call, the police arrived at the scene of the murder. When they entered the building, they found a large trail of blood that led them to Michael Hockensmith. They then found his wife, Angela, 38, and another victim, Dan Smith, 60, a broker, on the other side of the counter. All 3 victims had suffered serious injuries from gunshot wounds to the head and torso. Police later found Andrew, 9, and Naomi, 14 months, hiding in a closet. Andrew and Naomi had been through unimaginable horror and were orphaned, having lost both their parents. When examining the crime scene, police found 14 spent shell casings and 3 intact bullets, along with a briefcase belonging to Dan Smith. Remarkably, the victims' personal belongings and all the cash in the cash register were untouched, suggesting that robbery was not the motive. The case was complicated by the lack of surveillance cameras at the pawn shop. Therefore, police had to search for potential witnesses. An employee of Rainbow Cleaners, a nearby dry cleaner, provided vital information when he described a vehicle that had been parked near the building that morning. The vehicle was a silver pickup truck driven by a large man with a bushy beard. While one team of investigators searched the area, another team had to notify the victims' closest relatives of the tragedy. Michael's parents were devastated by the news. However, they also felt blessed to know that their grandchildren, Andrew and Naomi, had survived. The tragic news reached the daughter of the 3rd victim, Dan Smith. Dan Smith was involved in the purchase of precious metals and was well versed in the specifics of his job, which made it easy for him to find common ground with different people. His business involved handling large amounts of cash, sometimes in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. This led police to suspect that Dan Smith may have been the criminal's primary target. Through surveillance, police discovered that before going to the ABC Gold Games and More pawn shop, Dan Smith had gone to the Lawson Jewelry Store in Harrodsburg, 10 miles northeast of Danville. Inside the jewelry store, investigators found a surveillance camera mounted on the far wall that was monitoring every customer who entered and exited the store. Their goal was to determine if anyone was following Dan Smith. At 8:16 a.m., Dan Smith entered the store, and there were no other customers in the building at the time. Dan Smith was carrying a briefcase identical to the one later found at the ABC Gold Games and More pawn shop. After greeting the woman behind the counter with a smile, he walked toward the back of the store. Moments later, Dan Smith reappeared in the footage, exiting the back of the store, chatting briefly with an elderly woman who had just entered, and then leaving immediately. Footage from the exterior camera did not show anything suspicious. The police could do nothing but monitor the man, unaware that he would soon be at the center of a tragic event. Meanwhile, Andrew Hockensmith was brought to the police station to testify. Andrew told the story of how he was at the pawn shop with his parents when Dan Smith came in with a bag full of money. While Michael and Dan were talking, a stranger walked in and demanded the bag of money immediately. According to Andrew, Dan Smith immediately gave the stranger his bag of money. Andrew said that his father asked the man to stop, but the man also shot his father with a handgun similar to the one Andrew often played with. After that, his mother instructed him to take his younger sister, Naomi, to the back of the store and hide in the closet. Andrew picked up his sister and hid. At that moment, the criminal pointed the gun at Angela. The 9-year-old boy thought the reason the stranger did this might be because of the money. The boy described the stranger as a very tall man with a fake-looking blonde beard, which matched the description given by a witness from Rainbow Cleaners. In investigating the case, police thoroughly investigated the business run by the Hockensmith family. They discovered that the ABC Gold Games and More pawn shop had a different owner, Steve Devine. Although he usually attended Friday transactions with Dan Smith, he was absent on the morning of September 20th. This information raised concerns, making determining his whereabouts a top priority. Steve Devine explained that he had an allergic reaction that morning and had to cancel all his appointments. His wife confirmed this story. The alibi and the fact that Steve Devine did not own a silver pickup truck helped eliminate him as a suspect. Steve Devine also explained why there were no surveillance cameras in the pawn shop. According to him, the security system had been removed by the previous owner, Kenneth Keith. The new owner had yet to install a replacement. Kenneth Keith, 48, is a pastor like Michael Hockensmith. He sold the pawn shop after being diagnosed with brain cancer. However, he is still the owner of another similar establishment, Gold Rush Buyers, in Pulaski County, near Danville's Bowles district. Their friendship began when Michael worked at a church youth camp and lasted 15 years. The Hockensmiths respected Pastor Kenneth, and he was like a beloved uncle to Andrew. With no significant leads, investigators decided to search the street surveillance systems near ABC Gold Games and More and other pawn shops. They found a camera on the office building of the real estate company Danville Rentals. Surveillance footage captured a silver pickup truck at 8:45 a.m., but the image was too blurry to determine the license plate or make. However, eyewitness testimony from Rainbow Cleaners helped police identify the vehicle. The witness described the vehicle as an older model with a distinctive square body shape. The vehicle in the video also clearly showed a square rear bumper that matched this description. The color, type, and shape of the vehicle all suggested that police had found the vehicle of the criminal. They continued to search surveillance systems farther and farther away from the pawn shop. Finally, at 8:17 a.m., cameras at the local Ephraim McDowell Hospital captured the same vehicle. Investigators were able to determine that it was a silver Dodge pickup truck. Dan Smith's family was also devastated by the loss of their loved one. Despite their grief, they attended the funeral and held back their anger. In search of more clues, the Danville police asked the public to come forward with any information about the crime or the vehicle involved. On September 24th, the police received a call from Tracy Hurl, a pastor in Warren, Michigan. He claimed to be a friend of Kenneth Keith and said that in their last conversation, they had discussed the Danville murders. At that point, Kenneth seemed to have changed. Pastor Kenneth Allen informed Tracy that on that particular day, he was driving to Danville to pick up medication for his wife. Kenneth also expressed guilt over what had happened, as he had given Michael Hockensmith the opportunity to become the owner of his former business. It turned out Kenneth's relationship with the Hockensmith family was not what people thought. Tracy recounted that in a conversation with Kenneth, Kenneth said that Michael was a fraud and that Michael had done everything to take over the business from him. These statements aroused suspicion, leading to Kenneth being named a suspect. To verify Kenneth's alibi, investigators decided to review surveillance footage from the Good Neighbor Pharmacy, where Kenneth said he had purchased medication for his wife at 9:24 a.m. According to the surveillance footage, a man entered the pharmacy. It was Kenneth. But just a few minutes earlier, the man was not wearing a green jacket or a beard, which were easily identifiable features of an attacker. However, this did not rule out the possibility that Kenneth was involved in the attack. There was a 6-minute gap between Andrew Hockensmith's call to the police and Kenneth's arrival at the pharmacy. The police decided to check whether it was possible to travel from the crime scene to the Good Neighbor Pharmacy in such a short time. They found that the trip took about 5 minutes, so Kenneth could have committed the murder, quickly gotten in the car, and gone to the pharmacy to establish a solid alibi. In addition, the main clue was that Kenneth had an unregistered 2008 Dodge pickup truck, silver in color. However, all the evidence found was circumstantial and not enough to make an arrest. So the investigators asked Tracy Hurl to participate in a series of fake phone calls aimed at Kenneth. Fortunately, Tracy agreed. During these calls, Kenneth finally revealed his true feelings towards the Hockensmith family. Everyone had been waiting for this to happen. Kenneth began discussing details of the case that had not been made public. Kenneth said that he was in Danville, but he was at the pharmacy. Kenneth confirmed that he was standing in the pharmacy while all this was happening. Kenneth then explained that he had left Danville and returned to Somerset. He then drove to the car wash to prepare for a planned family vacation. At 10:50 a.m., Kenneth was seen on camera walking down the hallway to the cash register with a noticeable smile. Exterior camera footage covering the parking lot showed Pastor Kenneth leaving the car wash in the same silver Dodge at 11:25 a.m., matching all previous images captured by various surveillance systems in Danville. At that point, they had enough evidence to arrest Kenneth. However, when he was offered a lie detector test to clarify his role in the case, he reacted in an unusual way. He claimed that he would not be able to pass a lie detector test because, during his military service, he had performed some special missions that involved killing a number of people. Investigators then executed a search warrant at Kenneth Keith's pawn shop and discovered some important evidence. They found a fake beard and a significant amount of cash without any legal explanation as to how he had obtained it. In particular, they also found bundles of money wrapped in a ribbon with the name of the bank that issued them, indicating that Dan Smith was a customer. Further investigation revealed that the money found in Keith's pawn shop had recently been withdrawn from the account of a deceased broker. This raised suspicions about Keith's involvement in the case. In addition, investigators also found several .22 caliber shell casings in Keith's pawn shop. After ballistic analysis, they discovered that these casings had been fired from the same type of weapon used to shoot Andrew and Naomi's parents. Kenneth Keith was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder and robbery. He believed that Michael Hockensmith and Steve Dine were conspiring to remove him from the business. However, there was no evidence that Michael Hockensmith and Steve Dine were involved in any conspiracy. When Kenneth met Dan Smith at the pawn shop, he tried to create a fake plan to make the police think that the case was a robbery. However, the plan failed when the police investigated and found no evidence of suspicious activities by Michael Hockensmith and Steve Dine. On September 20th, Kenneth arrived in Danville in his silver Dodge Caravan. He circled the pawn shop until he saw Dan Smith's car parked nearby. Kenneth then killed Dan Smith, Michael Hockensmith, and Angela Hockensmith. After taking all the cash, Kenneth calmly left the crime scene and stopped at the Good Neighbor Pharmacy, which was captured on surveillance cameras, creating a false alibi. Kenneth's decision to have his car washed appears to have been another attempt to remove any evidence that might have been left on the car. Prior to sentencing, in 2017, Kenneth Allen Keith pleaded guilty to all charges. He was sentenced to life in prison. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Kelsey Smith. Kelsey Ann Smith was born on May 3, 1989, in Overland Park, Kansas, to Greg and Missy Smith, and was one of 5 siblings. After graduating from Shawnee Mission West High School on May 24, 2007, she was looking forward to enrolling in college that fall. Known for her outgoing and friendly nature, Kelsey's sense of humor was infectious, and she was a talented clarinet player in a marching band. On June 2, 2007, Kelsey worked her shift at the AMC movie theater. That morning, her mother, Missy, departed for a friend's wedding, unaware that their family's life was about to take a devastating turn and she would never see her daughter alive again. Before leaving, Missy had bid Kelsey farewell, oblivious to the tragic events that would soon unfold. Kelsey drove to work in the car her parents had given her. Her morning shift passed without incident. After finishing work, she met up with her father and sister Lindsay. The 3 of them then headed to an amusement park, where they had a wonderful time. Unfortunately, the day didn't end on a happy note. Around 6 p.m., Kelsey decided to go shopping and asked her sister to accompany her, but her sister declined. So, Kelsey left the house by herself and drove to the nearest Target department store. Before heading out, she informed her father, Greg, a policeman who adored his children, about her plans and expressed her love for him. As a caring father, Greg had taught his children basic self-defense techniques and always emphasized the importance of taking safety precautions. About an hour later, Kelsey phoned her mother, who was driving home from a friend's wedding, and told her she was out shopping. They had a brief conversation and made plans to meet up at home. Later that evening, Kelsey's boyfriend, John, arrived at the Smiths' house. As someone Greg trusted, John often spent time at their home, and everyone assumed their relationship would eventually become more serious. Kelsey had gone to the store to buy a gift for John. Meanwhile, John tried to call her, but the call didn't go through. He then went to her house, but she was nowhere to be found. Greg started calling his daughter, but she didn't answer. After numerous failed attempts to reach Kelsey, Greg grew increasingly worried. As a policeman, he tried to remain calm, but as a father, his concern only intensified with every passing minute. Greg began calling his daughter Kelsey's friends, but none of them knew her whereabouts or why she was ignoring calls and texts. This was unusual for Kelsey, who always made it a point to check in with her family, even if she was running just a little behind schedule. After a while, John and Kelsey's sister Lindsay decided to take action, getting into their car to search the area for Kelsey's vehicle. They started by checking the parking lots of various stores and eventually found a Buick registered to Kelsey in one of them. Although Kelsey had told her father she was headed to Target, her car was actually parked near a different store. John examined the car, but Kelsey was nowhere to be found. Lindsay quickly phoned their father to update him on the situation, and he warned them not to disturb anything, as the car could potentially be a crime scene. It was essential to preserve any evidence that might be present. Greg contacted the police to report his daughter Kelsey missing. The detectives promptly arrived at the location where John and Lindsay had found Kelsey's car. What struck Greg and everyone else as odd was that her car wasn't in the Target parking lot, as expected, but rather next to another store, in a dimly lit area of the parking lot. The detectives conducted a thorough examination of the car, searching for any clues that might lead them to Kelsey. However, they only found a package, some gift wrapping paper, and the gift Kelsey had purchased for her boyfriend, John. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood stains, or anything of that nature. The keys were discovered under the driver's seat, but then the detectives stumbled upon something suspicious. a piece of fabric resembling a t-shirt sticking out of the trunk. With anxiety, Greg opened the trunk, only to find it empty. Kelsey was nowhere to be found. However, it was clear that she had been to Target to buy a gift for John. Forensic experts meticulously examined the car and discovered a thumbprint on the seatbelt, but it didn't match Kelsey or anyone with access to the vehicle. Kelsey had recently graduated from high school with plans to attend the University of Kansas, where she aimed to become a veterinarian. Throughout her academic career, she had consistently excelled as an exemplary student. Her bright and ambitious personality, combined with her cheerful demeanor, had her whole life ahead of her. Yet she had inexplicably vanished, leaving her family desperate for answers. Despite their ongoing efforts, the police failed to find any evidence suggesting the car was a crime scene, apart from the unidentified fingerprint. It seemed as though someone had simply abandoned the car in the parking lot. Determined to uncover more information about Kelsey's disappearance, detectives visited Target, hoping to find clues in the CCTV footage. Although the store was closed by the time they arrived, they managed to find an employee who let them in and showed them the recordings. The police monitored Kelsey's every move for several hours, but her trip to the store seemed ordinary. She purchased the necessary items, paid, and left the store without incident. There was no indication of any problems or disputes with anyone while she was in the store. She remained calm and departed alone. However, something strange happened afterwards. Instead of driving home as planned, Kelsey drove in the opposite direction after getting into her car. Unfortunately, the recording quality was poor, making it impossible to see any details. This raised several important questions. Why did Kelsey deviate from her planned route? Was she driving the car herself? Could she have been hiding of her own free will? Before dawn, Greg and Missy visited the police station, where detectives questioned them extensively. As a policeman, Greg was aware that this was a standard procedure in investigations of this nature. The detectives needed to rule out the possibility of family involvement in the crime. Greg knew that the sooner he and Missy cooperated, the sooner they would be cleared as suspects, and the police could focus on pursuing other leads. Greg and Missy answered all the questions, and the police eventually cleared them as suspects. The next person of interest was Kelsey's boyfriend, John. Since Kelsey had spent most of her free time with him in the days leading up to her disappearance, and he was the last person she had contact with, the police wanted to investigate his alibi. They needed to know what John had been doing before he went to Kelsey's house and told her father he couldn't reach her. As partners are often closely tied to what happens to their loved ones, the detectives decided to intensify their questioning of John. They asked him the same questions, rephrased, to observe his reactions and identify any inconsistencies in his story. It took around 2 hours, but John was insistent he had no involvement in Kelsey's disappearance and that their relationship was fine. He cooperated fully, answering all the detectives' questions and allowing them to examine his phone's contents. Although the officers tended to believe John was telling the truth and unlikely to be involved in Kelsey's disappearance, they didn't entirely rule him out as a suspect. Kelsey's family couldn't simply wait, so they launched their own investigation. Greg knew that with each passing hour, the chances of finding his daughter alive decreased. Greg, Missy, and John organized volunteers into groups to search the area. Each volunteer received a bundle of Kelsey's missing person flyers and canvassed the necessary streets, asking if anyone had seen her. Greg also contacted radio stations, requesting airtime to appeal for information about his daughter's disappearance, asking anyone with valuable information to contact the police or the Smith family. An hour after radio stations broke the news of Kelsey's disappearance, TV channels picked up the story, greatly improving the chances of finding her quickly. Her classmates promptly joined the search effort, going door to door in the neighborhood, hoping to find someone who may have seen or heard something unusual, no matter how insignificant it might have seemed at the time. Any detail, no matter how small, was crucial to the investigation. One of the crucial questions the police had to address was Kelsey's whereabouts for 3 hours, from the time she left Target until John and Lindsay found her car. To answer this, investigators turned to surveillance cameras once more. Fortunately, the parking lot where Kelsey's car was found had cameras, although they belonged to a different store. However, the poor quality of the recording and inadequate lighting in that area of the parking lot made it impossible for detectives to gather any meaningful information about Kelsey's movements. They did see her car drive into the unlit area, followed by the headlights going out. Shortly after, the driver exited the vehicle and left, but the footage only showed a person's silhouette, making it unclear whether it was Kelsey or someone else. This lack of progress was frustrating for the police. Kelsey's family, however, saw this as a positive sign. They were confident that she had no reason to hide. Their top priority was to find Kelsey alive. With no new leads, the police decided to re-examine the Target surveillance footage, this time using better monitors. They retraced every step Kelsey took while inside the store, but found nothing suspicious. Everything appeared normal. Kelsey purchased the necessary items and left the store like a typical customer. In the parking lot, a crucial event may have led to Kelsey's disappearance. Although the recording was of poor quality, the detectives managed to identify a suspicious aspect. After leaving the store, Kelsey proceeded to her car in the parking lot and opened the rear door to load the purchases. Then, she headed towards the driver's door. At that moment, a blurry figure appeared, prompting the investigators to suspect an attack. The police believed that Kelsey was likely abducted as she entered her car. The investigators repeatedly reviewed the recording, but the viewing angle and quality did not permit a full understanding of the events. The car door closed, and the vehicle left the parking lot in about 15 seconds. It's possible that the car turned in the opposite direction from Kelsey's house, either because she wasn't driving or someone was threatening her. The detectives reluctantly informed Kelsey's parents that their daughter was probably the victim of an abduction. The only evidence available to the police was the video recording of the abduction, but the perpetrator's face was not visible. The abductor wore a white t-shirt and dark shorts. The investigators went back to the Target CCTV footage, this time specifically looking for someone wearing a white t-shirt and dark shorts. That's when they noticed something they'd previously missed. A man matching that description was following Kelsey everywhere she went. He kept a safe distance to avoid arousing her suspicion, but he was always lurking. There was no doubt this man was tailing Kelsey. When she went to the checkout to pay, he casually made his way to the exit, clearly planning to wait for her in the parking lot. The police eventually obtained a clearer image of his face. Though it wasn't perfect, they hoped someone would recognize him and come forward. The police appealed to the community for help in identifying the man, and they received over 1,000 calls with potential leads. It took a lot of time to sift through all that data. Detectives worked to weed out the information that was unlikely to be relevant to the case. They questioned several people who resembled the man, but none of them were the one they were looking for. A crucial breakthrough came when police tracked down Kelsey's phone after she vanished. The phone's signal was detected in a wooded area close to Longview Lake, Missouri, roughly 15 miles from the Target store where she was last seen. At this point, the FBI had already joined the investigation. They coordinated a massive search effort in the area where Kelsey's phone was last active, mobilizing around 200 people to participate. Kelsey was found 4 days after her abduction. Remarkably, just 45 minutes after her cell phone company provided crucial information about her phone activity, a lead worth exploring. Tragically, she was found dead, with her killer attempting to conceal evidence by hiding her body under leaves and tree branches. The fact that Kelsey's body was naked suggested that the motive behind the crime was sexual. Her personal belongings were discovered just a few feet away from her body. The forensic examination revealed that Kelsey had died from strangulation, with the killer using her own belt to take her life. The news of Kelsey's death was devastating for her family and friends. With the killer still at large, the police were under pressure to catch him as soon as possible, fearing that he might strike again and kidnap another victim. At this stage in the investigation, the only lead the police had was CCTV footage, which they decided to re-examine thoroughly. They found Kelsey's abandoned car in the Target parking lot at 9:17 p.m. Upon reviewing the same time frame, officers saw a man running to a dark pickup truck parked nearby, getting in, and speeding away at 9:22 p.m. Although it was dark when the truck left, investigators rewound the footage and confirmed the blue pickup had arrived at 6:55 p.m. Kelsey pulled into the lot a minute later, parking alongside the truck. The police released images of the pickup and the man who followed Kelsey, hoping someone would identify him. 2 callers contacted the police, claiming the man was Edwin Hall, a 26-year-old married father who owned a pickup truck. The police discovered Hall had no adult convictions, but a juvenile record for threatening his adoptive sister with a bread knife at 15. When the police arrived at Hall's home, they saw him putting things in his car, planning to leave with his family. The police arrested him and took him to a police station for questioning. Hall initially denied any involvement in Kelsey's disappearance and death, but the CCTV footage from Target left no doubt that he was following Kelsey. When confronted with the evidence, Hall admitted that he watched Kelsey because he liked her legs, but he continued to deny any contact with her after she left the store. The police discovered Hall's thumbprint on the seatbelt in Kelsey's car, conclusively linking him to her abduction and murder. Despite his denials, the police were certain Hall was the one who accosted Kelsey in the parking lot. After being informed of the fingerprint match, Hall chose not to wait for the DNA results and confessed to the crime in hopes of avoiding the death penalty. Hall provided a detailed account of the events. He admitted to having been drawn to Kelsey when he saw her in the Target parking lot. He began following her while she shopped, waiting for the opportunity to strike. Once she returned to her car, Hall pulled out a gun and attacked her. He forced her into her car, drove her to a secluded wooded area outside the city, and ordered her to undress. Fearing she would reveal the assault, Hall ultimately took Kelsey's life. After the murder, Hall concealed Kelsey's body under branches and leaves. He drove back to the city, abandoning Kelsey's car in a nearby parking lot. From there, he returned to Target, where his pickup truck was parked, and drove home. After their daughter Kelsey's death, Missy and Greg Smith observed that most violent crimes targeted children and young adults. They were determined to prevent this from happening to others. With this goal in mind, they developed safety awareness seminars. As a police officer at the time of Kelsey's death, Greg was able to apply the training methods he had learned on the force to a civilian setting. The Kelsey-Smith Act, which was passed in Kansas in 2009, has since been replicated in 23 other states. However, in 2016, it failed to pass the U.S. House of Representatives due to concerns among lawmakers about the potential invasion of privacy, as the bill would have allowed law enforcement to access information without subpoenas. The Smiths emphasized that only location data would be accessible, not personal content like texts, pictures, and phone calls. They have been advocating for a change in Congress. Their drive to push for this change stems from the tragic loss of their daughter, Kelsey. Kelsey was 18 years old, a recent high school graduate, when she went missing after leaving a Target store in Overland Park. It took 4 days for her cell phone company to provide location information, which ultimately led the police to find her body within 45 minutes. The Smiths have dedicated their lives to passing legislation that would expedite the process of obtaining location information in emergency situations, hoping to spare other families the agony of uncertainty they faced. As Missy Smith noted, had this legislation been in place, they would have saved 4 days of searching for Kelsey, not knowing if she was alive or what her fate was. In 2008, Edwin Hall was found guilty on all counts related to Kelsey's disappearance and murder. He apologized to the Smiths during the trial, expressing his deep regret. The court sentenced him to life imprisonment without parole. Over the past 16 years, Kelsey, who would have turned 34 on May 3rd, has become a symbol of the movement to compel telecommunications providers to respond promptly in emergency situations, particularly as GPS and cell phone technology have continued to advance. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Chris Coleman. On May 5, 2009, the Coleman family, who appeared to have the perfect life, was tragically murdered in their home just before 3 a.m. Let's examine the events of that night, a crime that left a lasting impact on many. Chris Coleman met his future wife, Sherry, while they were both serving in the military. For Sherry, it was love at first sight, and she knew immediately that Chris was the one she wanted to spend the rest of her life with. Within a few months of meeting, Sherry became pregnant with their first child, Garrett. As devout Christians, the couple married before Garrett was born. After Garrett's birth, Chris and Sherry had their second son, Gavin. Gavin was a lively child, whereas Garrett was more laid back, like his father. Both boys had lively personalities and were well behaved. Sherry was a devoted mother who would do anything to protect her sons. Chris was an excellent father, and the family enjoyed quality time together, laughing, playing, and cherishing every moment with their children. After leaving the military, the Colemans moved to Waterloo, Illinois, a small town, where they bought a house in an upscale neighborhood, courtesy of Chris's new job. Chris became the head of security for Joyce Meyer, a renowned TV evangelist and CEO of one of the world's largest Christian ministries. However, controversy arose due to Joyce's multi-million-dollar income and opulent lifestyle, which sparked criticism from some individuals. They accused her of being a greedy con artist who exploited her followers' fears, arguing that her financial success and lavish lifestyle conflicted with her religious teachings. As Joyce's bodyguard and personal security guard, Chris was responsible for monitoring and protecting her from hate mail and letters sent to her church, which often contained threats against her life, with people expressing their intentions to harm her. Chris earned a substantial salary of $100,000 per year working for Joyce's ministry in St. Louis, Missouri, providing financial stability for his family. As part of his job as a bodyguard, Chris frequently accompanied Joyce on international trips, ensuring his safety while abroad. However, this arrangement meant Chris was away from home for extended periods, affecting his family life. One year, Chris was gone for 260 days, which took a toll on his family, especially his sons, Garrett and Gavin. The boys missed their father and would mark off each day on a calendar, eagerly waiting for his return. However, shortly after Chris came home, he would have to leave again, causing tension in his marriage to Sherry. Sherry felt overwhelmed, shouldering the responsibilities of both parents and underappreciated for managing the household alone. The constant cycle of Chris's absence strained their relationship. In October 2008, Chris visited Tampa, Florida, where his friend Sherry had gone to high school. Sherry got in touch with her old friend Tara Lintz and asked her to look out for Chris while he was in town. After settling in, Chris contacted Tara and they agreed to meet up. Tara kindly showed Chris around the city. On November 14, 2008, at around 11 p.m., Chris received a disturbing email. The sender's email address was destroychris@gmail.com, and the subject line and content terrified him. The email warned Chris to stop working for Joyce Meyer, otherwise he or his family would be killed. Over the next few hours, more threatening emails arrived at the ministry from the same sender, repeating the threat and specifying a time and date when the attack on his family might happen. The sender seemed to know Chris's schedule and was aware that he would soon be traveling out of the country. Chris told Sherry about the threatening emails he'd been getting, and on the following Monday, he went to the local police station to report them. He explained that he'd been away from home a lot lately because he'd been traveling with Joyce Meyer Ministries. The police offered to increase their patrols around the house when Chris was away, but even with the extra police presence, Sherry was still afraid for her family's safety. Sherry was so scared that she once asked a friend to stay with her because she didn't feel safe staying alone in the house when Chris was away. She made it clear that she would do whatever it took to keep her family safe. To prove how serious she was, Sherry showed her friend that she had a gun and demonstrated how to hold it, just in case someone broke into the house while Chris was away and she wasn't there. 2 months after the death threats started, a mysterious hand-delivered letter arrived in the Coleman's mailbox. The letter was written in bold letters and was very demanding. It said, "Deny your God publicly or else. No more opportunities. Time is running out for you and your family." This threat was very ominous and specific, stating that if the Colemans didn't do what the writer wanted, they would face severe consequences. Sherry was deeply shaken by the disturbing message. The fact that someone had invaded her private space and threatened her and her family made her feel genuinely terrified throughout the ordeal. Sherry's fear grew more intense by the day. The letter she received was a constant reminder of the potential danger that lurked in the shadows, waiting to pounce. After getting a death threat in the mail, Sherry and her husband Chris decided to take extra measures to protect their family. As part of their safety plan, Chris installed surveillance cameras around their home. These cameras recorded the surroundings and sent the footage to a screen in their basement office. The footage was also saved on a digital video recorder, allowing Chris to keep a permanent record of any incidents. He hoped the cameras would help him identify the person behind the threats against their family. After the cameras were installed, the threats against the Colemans stopped. Life returned to normal for Chris, Sherry, and their sons, Garrett and Gavin. For a while, everything seemed fine. In April 2009, Sherry confided in others that she was feeling more optimistic about her marriage and was determined to make it work. She was relieved the death threats had stopped and felt a sense of happiness. However, Sherry's optimism was short-lived. A second ominous letter arrived at the Coleman home, warning her that her worst fears were about to become a reality. Chris, her husband, was unsettled by the letter's contents and decided to review the previous night's footage from their security camera. What he saw shocked him. A mysterious silhouette caught his attention, but its identity remained unclear. This new discovery reignited Sherry's fear for her own and her children's safety, plunging her back into a state of constant unease. The brief sense of security she had felt was now gone, replaced by the feeling that her worst nightmare was closing in. The local police boosted their efforts due to the rising threats against the Coleman family. A neighbor, Detective Sergeant Justin Barlow from the Columbia Police Department, took a keen interest in the case. Detective Barlow personally called Chris to discuss the situation. During their conversation, Detective Barlow mentioned that he had noticed Chris's recent work absences from home. He offered help, providing his cell phone number in case Chris needed anything or had concerns. Detective Barlow reassured Chris that he could respond faster in an emergency than the regular police. Detective Justin Barlow lived across the street from the Coleman family, so he set up video cameras to monitor their driveway over several weeks. Although the cameras captured footage of the Colemans going about their daily routines, they did not capture the person responsible for leaving the death threats. Despite his efforts, the videos did not provide any clues or information about the identity of the person behind the threatening messages. On May 5, 2009, Chris went to the gym at 5:45 a.m. After leaving his house around 5:30 a.m., he called his home phone at 6:45 a.m. to check if his wife Sherry and their sons were up and getting ready for school. When no one answered, Chris became worried and called his neighbor, Detective Justin Barlow at 6:45 a.m. to ask for his help. Chris explained to Detective Barlow that he had been trying to reach Sherry while he was at the gym, but she wasn't picking up. This made Chris increasingly concerned, so he asked Detective Barlow to check on Sherry and the boys. Detective Barlow prepared himself by grabbing his essential items, including his weapon, handcuffs, flashlight, and radio, before heading to the Coleman residence. While waiting for backup to arrive, his main goal was to make contact with Sherry and ensure everything was okay. With a mix of anticipation and apprehension, Detective Barlow approached the door and knocked firmly, hoping to get a response. However, the silence that followed made him feel uneasy. The lights inside the house were off, and there was no sign of movement, which only added to his bad feeling. Within minutes of Detective Justin Barlow's arrival at the Coleman home, a patrol vehicle pulled up with an additional officer to assist him. The second officer was sent to the rear of the house to try to see through a door or window or establish contact with Sherry or the boys at the back of the house. But as soon as the officer reached the back, he found signs of forced entry into the basement. This discovery immediately grabbed Detective Barlow's attention, and he began to suspect that someone inside the house was in danger. Detective Barlow was deeply concerned for the safety of Sherry, Garrett, and Gavin after discovering the signs of forced entry into the Coleman home. Detective Barlow and the second officer decided to enter the premises through the basement. They announced their presence, but received no response. As they thoroughly searched the basement, they found a disconnected video cable at the computer desk. This led them to conclude that the camera's digital video recorder had been taken. Detective Justin Barlow and another officer made their way up from the basement of the Coleman home, ascending the stairs to the main level. As they climbed, they noticed an increasingly strong smell of aerosol spray paint. Once they reached the top, they saw that the wall had been spray painted with derogatory messages targeting Chris, Sherry, and their sons. 13 minutes after Chris phoned Detective Justin Barlow, Chris returned home from the gym. The detective told him to wait outside while they searched the house. Chris complied, sitting quietly on the porch without asking questions or trying to enter. Meanwhile, a third officer arrived at the Coleman residence. The three officers knew they had to search the rest of the house for Sherry and her sons. As they went upstairs, they found more hate-filled messages spray-painted on the walls when they reached the second story of the Coleman home. Detective Justin Barlow entered Garrett's bedroom, the oldest son's room, and initially thought he was asleep. But when he got closer, the detective realized Garrett was dead. There were no signs of life, and his body was cold to the touch. Ligature marks around his neck indicated the young boy had been murdered by strangulation. The discovery of Garrett's lifeless body shocked Detective Barlow. In the next room, the second officer found Gavin, but to his horror, the boy was also dead, just like his brother. Gavin also had ligature marks around his neck, indicating he had been strangled. The killer had even spray-painted an obscene message on the bed sheets, making the scene even more horrific. The third officer entered the master bedroom, where he was met with a deeply disturbing scene. Sherry, like her sons, was lying lifeless across the bed, her hair scattered over her face, hiding her features. It was obvious to the officer that Sherry had been brutally murdered. As he surveyed the room, he noticed multiple bruises on Sherry's body, suggesting that she had fiercely resisted her attacker, fighting to defend herself and her sons. After Detective Justin Barlow and the officers discovered the lifeless bodies of Sherry, Garrett, and Gavin, Chris entered the house, having waited outside for news about his family. Unaware of the gravity of the situation, Chris announced his presence. Detective Barlow then had the heartbreaking task of informing Chris that his entire family had been murdered. This devastating news crushed Chris, leaving him reeling. To give Chris some privacy to process the information, Detective Barlow accompanied him outside. However, as the reality of the situation set in, Chris's reaction was overwhelming. He became nauseous, and his body seemed to weaken. Overcome with grief, Chris curled up in a fetal position, unable to contain the torrent of emotions. The shock of the tragedy was too much for him to absorb. Chris couldn't comprehend the brutal way his family had been taken from him. In desperation, Chris reached out to his father, Ronald, and informed him that something had happened to Sherry and the boys. Ronald immediately realized Chris was in shock upon receiving the news. Ronald was equally stunned, unable to believe that this tragedy had befallen his family. News of the shocking murders of Sherry, Garrett, and Gavin Coleman spread swiftly throughout Waterloo, Illinois, where the family lived. As the community awoke to the grim news, neighbors were left devastated and terrified. The Coleman family had always been perceived as the epitome of a perfect American family, with their charming sons, Garrett and Gavin, admired by everyone. In fact, one neighbor went so far as to say that everyone would want their children to be like Garrett and Gavin, who were always polite, helpful, and kind-hearted. For Sherry's brother and mother, the harsh reality of the brutal crime was impossible to accept. Chris Coleman, the husband and father, was taken to a nearby police station for questioning after his wife and 2 sons were discovered murdered. During the interrogation, Detective Justin Barlow asked Chris if he could shed any light on the killings. Chris expressed deep regret for leaving to go to the gym, leaving Sherry and the boys alone in the home. When Detective Barlow asked Chris if he had any idea who could have committed the murders, Chris claimed he had no idea. However, several aspects of Chris's behavior during the interview raised suspicions with the detective. One of the detective's initial concerns was Chris's lack of curiosity about the circumstances surrounding his wife and son's murder. Given the gravity of the situation, it seemed odd that Chris didn't ask questions about their deaths. Instead, he appeared uninterested in finding out the details. Additionally, the detective noticed that Chris tried to conceal scratches on his arms during the interview. He asked for a blanket, despite the warm room temperature, to hide the injuries. These scratches raised suspicions as the detective knew that Sherry, Chris's wife, had fought for her life. When questioned about the scratches, Chris claimed they resulted from installing a satellite dish the day before. During the police interview, Chris denied having an affair outside of his marriage. However, he admitted to having a close friendship with Tara, a cocktail waitress and high school friend of his wife's who lived in Florida. Chris claimed that his wife wouldn't have approved of their conversations, but he maintained that he had no intention of leaving his wife for Tara. He insisted that he would never consider betraying his family in such a way. A different story unfolded when detectives contacted Tara in Florida. Tara claimed that her relationship with Chris went beyond friendship, alleging a full-blown affair that started in November 2008. She handed over her phone and laptop to the police, which contained convincing evidence of their romance, including emails, explicit photos, and videos they had exchanged. When confronted with Tara's information, Chris confessed to seeing her more frequently than he initially admitted. Further investigation revealed that Chris and Tara had devised a secret meeting system, often coinciding with his work trips for Joyce Meyer. They would secretly meet at these locations, sometimes traveling to exotic destinations like Hawaii to spend time together away from their families. Chris claimed his relationship with Tara wasn't an affair, defining an affair as involving a deeper level of commitment and involvement than they had. However, detectives found contradictory evidence on Tara's phone and computer, including a calendar marked with a wedding to Chris and scheduled vacations, suggesting she believed he would leave his family for her. This evidence raised suspicions, contradicting Chris's assertion that their relationship was casual. Chris's father, Ronald, was shocked by the revelation, but insisted that the affair had no connection to the murders of Chris's wife and son. He described Chris as gentle and non-violent, emphasizing that he showed no signs of aggression. Detectives suspected Chris's affair with Tara was a strong motive for the murders, but their initial investigation found insufficient evidence to press charges. After 6 hours of questioning, Chris was released without charges. Tara was identified as a person of interest in the murders of Sherry Garrett and Gavin. However, detectives cleared her as a suspect after determining she was in Florida on the morning of May 5, 2009, when the family was killed. The Coleman family murders led to one of the largest murder investigations in Illinois history. A task force of 25 detectives was formed to catch the killer. For 15 consecutive days, they worked 20-hour shifts, bringing in experts to assist with the case. A key focus of the task force was tracing the source of the hate-filled emails sent to Chris Coleman. Every threatening email received by Joyce Meyer Ministries in the past year was carefully analyzed, leading the team to locations across the country. Each person who emailed Joyce Meyer was tracked down and interviewed, but none of the individuals who sent those threats seemed to be responsible for the Coleman family's murder. A computer forensic team was called in to investigate the murders of Sherry, Garrett, and Gavin. The detectives wanted to find any digital clues related to the crime, so they began by analyzing the email account, diarist@gmail.com. Their analysis revealed that the email address was created on November 14, 2008, just days before the first email was sent. One of the most significant discoveries made by the team was that the death threats sent to Chris Coleman's family had originated from the same IP address associated with Chris himself. The detectives continued their investigation into the Coleman family's murder by conducting a thorough examination of both the spray-painted messages found at the crime scene and Christopher Coleman's handwriting to gather evidence. They took photographs of the spray-painted messages at the crime scene and collected samples of Christopher Coleman's handwriting. These samples were then sent to a handwriting expert for analysis. After comparing the two samples, the expert concluded that the handwriting matched the spray-painted messages. This finding led the detectives to conclude that Christopher Coleman was the one who wrote the messages on the walls of his home on the day of the murders. A chemical analysis of the spray paint used at the crime scene identified the brand and color as Rust-Oleum Candy Apple Red. Investigators learned that Chris Coleman had bought this exact product at a local hardware store just days before his family was killed. One detective contacted the store manager, who confirmed the purchase and identified the specific product as Rust-Oleum Candy Apple Red spray paint. This crucial discovery linked Chris Coleman to the same type of spray paint found at the murder scene. During the investigation into the Coleman family's murder, the time of death became a crucial factor. Initially, Chris claimed to have left his home around 5:45 a.m. on May 5, 2009, the morning his family was killed. However, the medical examiner's report showed that Sherry, Garrett, and Gavin were killed around 3 a.m., indicating that Chris was at home when his family was murdered. 2 weeks after the bodies were discovered, Chris Coleman was arrested and charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder. The prosecution's argument was that the murders were motivated by greed, selfishness, and narcissism, and that Chris had decided to eliminate his family to start anew. In April 2011, Chris Coleman's trial began, with the state accusing him of murdering his wife, Sherry, and their 2 sons, Garrett and Gavin. The prosecution's case was that Chris had killed his family because he wanted to be with Tara Lynn, but couldn't divorce his wife due to the potential loss of his well-paying job with Joyce Meyer Ministries, which did not condone divorce. Conversely, Chris's defense attorney argued that Chris was innocent and that an intruder had entered the home on May 5, 2009, and committed the murders. Exactly 2 years after the devastating murders of Sherry, Garrett, and Gavin, Chris Coleman was finally found guilty of the heinous crime. Although eligible for the death penalty, the judge instead sentenced Chris to life imprisonment without parole. This verdict was influenced by the state of Illinois' recent repeal of the death penalty, which was set to take effect just months after the tragic incident. Sherry's loved ones and friends were resolute in keeping her, Garrett, and Gavin's memories alive, and sought to do something meaningful to honor them. They decided to raise funds for victims of domestic violence, a cause that deeply resonated with them. Hello friends. Welcome to our channel. Today, we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Luz Maria Lopez. Luz Maria Lopez was born on March 17, 1995, in San Cristobal Verapaz, a small town, to a modest family of A. Morales and Brian Lopez. She was the youngest of two children, with an older brother named Omar. In infancy, Luz Maria faced a life-threatening intestinal obstruction that required a complex operation. Despite the doctor's uncertainty, her mother's prayers and faith in her recovery paid off, and the surgery was successful. Fortunately, the early surgery did not affect her development. During her school years, Luz Maria was an active and well-rounded student. She participated in gymnastics, athletics, and classical dance, and was a people person who easily made friends. She also excelled academically, particularly in the humanities. After graduation, Luz Maria decided to pursue higher education at a prestigious state university, where she chose to study law and later specialized in criminalistics, a field that had always fascinated her. When Luz Maria was a student, she accompanied her mother to a car dealership in Coban, the capital of Alta Verapaz, to buy a motorcycle as a 25th birthday gift for her older brother. They met a polite and attentive young consultant named Jorge, who showed them various models and offered recommendations. Although Luz Maria and her mother chose a model, they decided to think it over and consult with the rest of the family before making a decision. Before leaving, Luz Maria gave Jorge her phone number in case they needed further feedback. Shortly after, Jorge called Luz Maria, but instead of discussing the potential purchase, their conversation turned personal. He continued to call her several times before mustering the courage to invite her to a coffee shop. It was clear that he was smitten with the beautiful brunette, but didn't know how to initiate their acquaintance. Luz Maria was immediately drawn to a handsome young man, and when he asked to meet, she agreed. The only potential obstacle was that he was a year younger, but that didn't deter them. A romantic relationship quickly blossomed, and they both felt an intense connection, believing they had found true love. After just a few months, they decided to take the next step and start living together. Despite their parents' disapproval, they pressed on and got married 6 months later. They kept the wedding intimate, inviting only close friends and family. However, the celebration was almost ruined on the wedding day when the banquet venue encountered an unexpected issue. The couple had to pay a significant amount of extra money to salvage the event, but they were eventually able to go ahead with the ceremony as planned. Jorge is a mysterious figure, and there is limited information available about him in the public domain. What is known is that he was born in 1996 in the town of Santa Catalina Latina, Guatemala. Jorge grew up with his brother Pablo in a low-income family, where financial struggles were a constant reality. As a result, the brothers had to make do with the basics and didn't have the luxury of nice clothes or expensive toys. Contrary to what one might expect, Jorge didn't have big aspirations or ambitions. He never made an effort to study or find a good job, and instead, he took things as they came. Those who knew Jorge described him as introverted, uncommunicative, and sometimes aggressive. He struggled with controlling his emotions, which made it difficult for him to form meaningful relationships or connect with the opposite sex. Despite these challenges, Jorge was determined to win the heart of Luz Maria, the love of his life. He went all out to impress her, and once she agreed to marry him, he was in a hurry to seal the deal, fearing she might change her mind. Luz Maria's parents, however, were not convinced about Jorge from the start. They had reservations about their son-in-law, although they couldn't quite put their finger on what bothered them. Despite their misgivings, they couldn't persuade their daughter to reconsider her decision to marry Jorge. After the wedding, the young couple's marriage quickly became unhappy. The wife, Luz Maria, got pregnant, but she couldn't find a good job because she didn't have a university degree and was inexperienced. No employer wanted to hire an expectant mother with no skills, so she had to settle for casual labor. Meanwhile, her husband, Jorge, lost his job and showed no enthusiasm for finding a new one. When their daughter, Alice, was born, the family's financial situation became dire. Both Jorge and Luz Maria were unemployed and struggling to make ends meet. They couldn't even afford to pay rent, buy food, or purchase basic household necessities. Jorge convinced Luz Maria that they had no choice but to move in with his parents temporarily. Luz Maria was initially hesitant, but with a baby to care for and no other options, she eventually agreed. Her mother, was aware of the family's problems and encouraged Luz Maria to return to her childhood home, but Luz Maria insisted that things would improve with Jorge, and there was no need to worry. Luz Maria's mother visited her daughter and granddaughter at her son-in-law's parents' house, but was met with a disturbing scene. Luz Maria was in a terrible condition, malnourished from only eating once a day. This was partly due to her in-laws not providing her with sufficient food, as they saw her as unemployed. The situation was even more concerning because Luz Maria was breastfeeding her baby, Alice, so her malnutrition could also harm the child's health. The lack of food was just one of the many problems Luz Maria faced in her in-laws' home. She was constantly humiliated and even physically abused by her husband's younger brother. He was irritated by the baby's crying and the presence of children's belongings in the house. He would lash out at Luz Maria, throwing her child's things at her, and on one occasion, even threw a baby bottle at her, hitting Alice, who was in her mother's arms. Jorge refused to stand up for his wife and daughter, treating them as if they were strangers. His mother-in-law, convinced her daughter to take her granddaughter and move back to her parents' house. However, Jorge soon showed up, asking his wife to return and promising to get a job. She agreed, but only if their children could rent an apartment and live separately from his parents. After Luz Maria defended her diploma, she achieved her long-held dream. She landed a job at the city prosecutor's office, earning the respect of her colleagues with her intelligence, talent, and responsibility. As she advanced in her career, the family's financial situation significantly improved, eventually allowing them to afford a car. This improvement was entirely due to the wife's hard work, frugality, and strong reputation among her superiors. Jorge was a selfish and lazy person who relied on his wife, Luz Maria's income instead of working. He had a bad temper, was abusive, and controlled every aspect of Luz Maria's life. He wouldn't let her have friends, go out with colleagues, or even leave the house without him. He constantly checked her phone and social media, and even forbade her from using them. Jorge's behavior was extremely abusive, and he never stood up for Luz Maria when his relatives humiliated or physically abused her. He also used physical violence against her, treating her like his property. Despite this, Luz Maria repeatedly tried to leave him, but he would beg for forgiveness, and she would give him another chance. On December 15, 2020, after a violent fight, Luz Maria left Jorge and went to her mother's house with their 3-year-old daughter Alice. However, Jorge showed up, promising to change and claiming he had found a new job. Luz Maria believed him again and returned to their apartment. In mid-January 2021, Luz Maria called her mother, complaining about Jorge's broken promises and theft, which had left them in a desperate situation. However, Luz Maria stopped responding to calls and messages, which was unusual behavior for her. Her mother grew concerned and went to her workplace, only to find out that Luz Maria was missing. The police were informed, and a nationwide search effort began, with Jorge as the prime suspect. He denied any involvement, claiming he was also searching for his wife. However, the investigation revealed that Jorge was the last person to see Luz Maria alive, and he was the only suspect in her disappearance. Jorge was outraged and frustrated to be the prime suspect in his wife's disappearance, particularly since his own alibi was inconsistent and unclear. He struggled to explain why he hadn't reported her missing to the police on the day she vanished. If he thought she was at her mother's house, Why didn't he call or visit her while the police were searching the area and looking for witnesses? On January 22nd, municipal workers made a gruesome discovery while responding to a call about a clogged storm drain. They found a large plastic bag containing a charred human body. Forensic experts confirmed that the body was that of a young woman. Her parents and brother identified the body as Luz Maria Lopez, despite its severe disfigurement. The body was discovered near the prosecutor's office where Luz Maria worked. Although the area lacked surveillance cameras and lighting, pathologists were able to determine that she had suffered severe beating and died from asphyxia. The evidence included internal hemorrhages, fractures sustained while she was alive, and caked blood particles in her nose and mouth. The investigation revealed that Luz Maria's husband, Jorge, was the prime suspect. A disturbing audio recording, sent anonymously by a neighbor, captured a brutal argument between the couple. The recording revealed Luz Maria's desperate screams and cries for help, as well as faint sobs in the background. Unfortunately, the neighbor who made the recording did not call the police or check on the source of the screams. Luz Maria's mother believes that if the neighbor had acted immediately, her daughter might still be alive. The recording was included in the case files, and Luz Maria's mother gave a powerful interview urging citizens to report incidents of domestic violence to the police rather than simply recording or filming them. Thousands of people protested across the country, demanding justice for Luz Maria. Although Jorge was arrested, he maintained his innocence, claiming he drove his wife to work on the day she vanished. However, security footage showed their car heading towards her workplace, but the tinted windows made it impossible to determine how many people were inside. At the couple's rented home, investigators found washed-out blood traces and drag marks, indicating that the brutal crime likely occurred there. This suspicion was strengthened by the discovery of microscopic fragments of burnt flesh in the trunk of the family car. A recent purchase by the couple, a double orthopedic mattress, caught the investigators' attention. Specifically, it was the dense polyethylene wrapping around the mattress that was significant. Comparative analysis revealed that Jorge had used this wrapping to conceal his wife's burnt remains. Several neighbors reported hearing Jorge threaten and insult his wife just days before her sudden disappearance. They recalled him shouting that he would kill her if she left him, and that he would hide her body where no one could find it. Based on the evidence collected by expert criminologists and witness testimonies, the investigation has reconstructed the horrific events of the crime. On the night of January 19, 2021, Jorge committed the murder, just one day after he and his wife had a violent argument. Jorge had a history of uncontrolled outbursts of anger, but this time he completely lost control. He brutally beat his wife, causing her to scream for help. The neighbors heard her cries but failed to call the police. During the beating, Jorge broke his wife's nose and inflicted a severe head injury. Afterwards, he strangled her with his bare hands and attempted to dispose of the body. To do so, he dragged her into the backyard, poured campfire liquid on her, and set her on fire. However, the intense smoke and smell of burning flesh and hair caught him off guard. The most disturbing aspect of the crime is that Jorge committed these atrocities in front of their 3.5-year-old daughter. Although she may not have fully understood what was happening, she witnessed the beating and murder, which was evident from her cries and screams that were recorded. Jorge, who had a basic understanding of forensic science from his wife's textbooks at home, attempted to cover up the crime and create an alibi. He deliberately chose a dark and secluded area without surveillance cameras to dispose of his wife Maria's body in a drainage sewer, escaping detection. The following morning, Jorge drove to Maria's workplace via their usual route, pretending to have dropped her off as he normally did every morning. Then, he began fabricating a search for his wife, contacting her co-workers, friends, and family. During the trial, Jorge's lawyers employed stall tactics to delay proceedings and discredit the investigation. They argued that all evidence and witness testimony was indirect and that there was no concrete proof to conclusively establish Jorge's guilt. Defense attorneys requested that Jorge's detention be changed to house arrest, citing his deep depression over being accused of killing the woman he loved and the mother of his child. However, crucial evidence came from Maria's phone, which had been in Jorge's possession since the crime. On the first day after the murder, Jorge used Maria's phone to send messages to various people, trying to create the illusion that she was still alive. Analysis of the phone's movements showed it was constantly in the same locations as Jorge's phone. The defense argued that Jorge had found his wife's phone and was driving around the city to search for her, but this claim was weakened by the fact that he had sent messages from her phone and even called it from his own phone. Further evidence of Jorge's guilt included the bruises and scratches on his body, documented by experts in photos, which suggested that the victim had put up a struggle. A notable scratch on his neck was particularly telling. While it was not possible to find Jorge's skin cells under the victim's fingernails due to the fire, the cumulative evidence pointed to his guilt. The prosecutor sought the maximum punishment for the defendant despite several contentious issues in the case. However, the court proceedings were frequently delayed. In October 2022, the defendant was finally convicted of brutally murdering his wife. He received a 50-year prison sentence, still maintaining his innocence. Custody of their young daughter, Alice, was awarded to her maternal grandparents. They expressed that caring for their granddaughter has now become the main purpose of their lives. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Carol Maltese. Carol Nicole Maltese was born on September 19, 1995, in a small province in Italy. She was the only child of Fabio and Josephine and had a mix of Italian and Dutch heritage. When Carol was just 4 years old, her parents got divorced, and she stayed with her mother. Her father moved back to the Netherlands, got remarried, and had more children. Carol's mother, Josephine, chose to stay in Italy and raise her daughter on her own. Despite her former husband's lack of support, Josephine worked multiple jobs to give Carol a good education and a better life. Carol grew up to be a kind, sociable, and beautiful girl with many friends. She was active in sports, particularly horseback riding, and loved to dance. She was fluent in 3 languages, enjoyed traveling across Europe, reading, and could talk about almost any subject. As a teenager, Carol became a stunning beauty with a slim figure, and she loved being the center of attention. After finishing school, Carol went on to study industrial design, arts, and fashion at a technical university. She quickly became one of the top students in her class. Carol began dating a young man, a year older, and studying architecture and design during her freshman year. When she was 20, she discovered she was pregnant, which came as a shock to both her and the father. Despite being unprepared, Carol decided to keep the baby. In 2016, Carol gave birth to a son, and she and the father were forced to drop out of school due to financial constraints. They moved to Verona for better job opportunities to support their family. Carol landed a job as a sales consultant at a cosmetics and perfume retail chain when her son turned 1, while her partner worked from home and took care of their child. In mid-2019, Carol started an affair with Angelo, secretly meeting him in hotel rooms and exchanging messages at night. However, just before the new year, the father of her child discovered her infidelity and ended their relationship. Carol thought it was for the best to leave since she was already planning to move in with her new boyfriend. However, a complication came up. Angelo still lived with his parents, and it wasn't possible for Carol to move in there with her child from a previous relationship. So, they made the decision to rent a place together instead. When the economic crisis hit, they lost their jobs and couldn't afford their apartment. Carol moved in with her new boyfriend's parents and made the difficult decision to leave her 4-year-old son with his biological father until things got better and she could bring him to live with her. As the economic crisis worsened, a self-isolation regime was put in place, and everyone was forced to stay at home. Carol struggled financially during this time and relied on Angelo and his parents for support, unable to contribute financially to her son's care. To make matters worse, Carol's mother was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, which required expensive therapy. With no other options, Carol desperately sought ways to earn money from home to support her son and ill mother. She turned to social media and YouTube, sharing her experiences of living in isolation and the challenges she faced, in an effort to generate an income during the lockdown. Carol's early blog posts didn't gain much traction, but her attractive appearance caught readers' attention. She received flattering comments as well as some inappropriate proposals. One subscriber suggested she join OnlyFans, a platform where her looks would be in high demand, and she could quickly become a star and earn a lot of money. Taking this advice, Carol created an account under the pseudonym Charlotte Angel and began posting provocative photos and short videos. She quickly gained a large following of paying customers. While Carol's earnings increased, she kept her new career a secret from her boyfriend and close family members. As time passed, Carol's content became more explicit and sophisticated as she worked to satisfy her fans. She herself found enjoyment in this line of work. However, Carol was able to keep her secret hidden for only about 6 months before someone she knew discovered her account. The news spread quickly, and soon everyone knew how she was making a living. Carol's friends and family in Italy didn't understand her decision to work in the adult film industry. They saw it as immoral and were embarrassed to be associated with her. Carol, on the other hand, was confident that her work was a form of art that could bring her success, wealth, and fame. As she became more popular, adult film studios and directors approached her with offers to star in their films, which she accepted. She started participating in group shoots and public performances, but her boyfriend Angelo was still in the dark, thinking she was working remotely as a designer. However, when Angelo finally found out the truth, he was shocked and unsure of what to do. But when his parents discovered Carol's profession, they demanded that he break up with her immediately, fearing that she would bring shame to their family. Carol's OnlyFans account had become extremely successful, earning her enough money to rent her own place and attracting offers from directors. Her fees continued to rise, and she professed in interviews that this was not a long-term career goal. Instead, she planned to eventually complete her education and pursue a career in design or modeling. For now, she was enjoying her work and was well compensated. Despite her success, Carol frequently spoke about the constant moral pressure she faced from others. Their judgments and attempts to shame her led to feelings of anxiety and guilt. However, she defended her work as a form of art and believed that every woman should have the freedom to choose her profession without fear of judgment. Carol started anew in Rescaldina, Milan province, leaving her adult film career behind and working as a sales consultant at a perfume boutique. However, this fresh start was short-lived. She met David Fontana, a 42-year-old banker and nude photographer online. He was seeking a model, and Carol responded, feeling an instant attraction during their first meeting. Despite being married, Fontana pursued a relationship with Carol, and they began dating, combining photo shoots with intimacy. Fontana learned about Carol's past and encouraged her to return to filmmaking, recognizing her talent. He had complex feelings for her, loving and possessive, yet also enjoying seeing her in adult films. After divorcing his wife in March 2021, Fontana moved in with Carol, and they explored their explicit fantasies together. He assisted her in creating popular content on OnlyFans, taking a share of the profits from their joint ventures. Carol's success in the adult film industry led to her receiving lucrative contract offers from foreign directors and studios. However, her boyfriend Fontana became jealous and reacted angrily when others showed interest in her. Months later, Angelo, who was still in love with Carol, reached out to her and confessed his feelings. he proposed that they get back together, promising not to interfere with her work. Carol was touched by his words but revealed that she was already in a relationship with someone else, David. Despite this, Carol and Angelo continued to stay in touch. However, when David found out about their communication, he became furious and threatened Angelo. He even went as far as setting Angelo's car on fire. Angelo reported the threats and property damage to the police, and a restraining order was issued against David. However, there was no evidence to link David to the arson, so he didn't have to pay for the damages. As Carol's popularity grew, she traveled frequently for shoots and gained over 30,000 followers. She was saving money to buy a home, take her son with her, and eventually leave the adult film industry to focus on raising him and finding a new job. Meanwhile, she started creating custom videos, which became a profitable venture. Carol received scripts from fans who paid her to bring their fantasies to life. She continued to work with Fontana on filming and editing, and they shared the profits and lived together. In September 2021, she met Salvatore Galdo, an actor, on a film set, and they started working together on explicit films. As they worked together, Carol and Galdo developed real feelings for each other, and they began a romantic relationship in secret, afraid of how David, her current partner, might react. She waited for the right moment to tell David everything and end their relationship. A few months later, Galdo proposed to Carol with an engagement ring, and she happily accepted. By the end of the year, she had saved enough money to buy her own home. Carol planned to take her son, Mary, with her and decided it was time to talk to Fontana about her decision. Fontana took the news surprisingly well, understanding that Carol was moving on to her new partner. However, they still had unfinished projects that they had already been paid for, so they agreed to complete the work and then go their separate ways. Carol's sudden and mysterious disappearance in 2022, similar to Carol's earlier vanishing act, left everyone stunned. She abruptly stopped acting in films, discontinued her online streams, and ceased communication with colleagues. Moreover, she refused to accept new project offers from directors. Although many people were aware that Carol had planned to leave the entertainment industry, her complete disappearance still came as a surprise. Carol's friends and husband, Salvatore, grew concerned when she stopped responding to their calls. Despite her reassurances via social media, they sensed something was amiss. Months passed, and Carol's occasional social media posts revealed she'd gone on a seaside vacation without telling anyone. Her brief, curt responses only added to their unease. On March 20, 2022, a passerby discovered large black trash bags near a rocky cliff in the Italian community of Borno. Upon approach, the passerby found human fingers poking through the torn polyethylene. He immediately reported the gruesome find to the police, who discovered 4 bags containing a human body divided into 18 parts. The remains were so disfigured that identification seemed impossible. Forensic experts determined the young woman had died at least 2 months prior, but the cause of death remained unknown. It was clear the body had been stored in a freezer before being dumped, likely to keep it hidden. The criminal had removed distinctive features, tattoos, and skin pieces, then burned, cut, and doused the skin in acid to conceal the tattoos. Despite this, investigators pieced together tattoo fragments and matched them to a missing persons database. A news report about the body led a woman from the adult film industry to recognize the tattoos as belonging to a missing colleague, Charlotte. This information allowed law enforcement to identify Carol, who had become engaged to her coworker, Salvatore Galdo, before her disappearance. What's curious is that he didn't report her missing. Salvatore became the prime suspect, but his distraught reaction and conversation history with Carol seemed genuine. However, his story didn't add up, leading to another suspect, David, being questioned. David showed up at the police station to report Carol missing, oblivious to the recent discovery. His nervous, contradictory story eventually led to his confession. He had accidentally killed Carol. David Fontana claimed to be filming a scenario for a client who had paid a large sum of money. The script involved binding a woman, taping her mouth shut, covering her head with a bag, and brutally beating her with various tools, including a hammer. David was supposed to pretend to inflict severe pain without actually harming her. However, he allegedly went too far and struck her with a hammer, fracturing her skull. Instead of calling for help, he ended her suffering with another blow. Panicked, he dismembered the body and stored it in his freezer for over 2 months before deciding to dispose of it. The investigation revealed that David was the mysterious client who had orchestrated the entire scenario to exact revenge on the woman, Carol, who had decided to leave him. During the torture session, he extracted her phone password, which was supposedly part of the script. On January 11th, David fatally struck Carol with a hammer and used her credit card to buy a freezer, saw, and axe to dismember her body. He disfigured the body to prevent identification and stored the parts in the freezer for over 2 months. During this time, he communicated with Carol's relatives and friends on her behalf, creating the illusion that she was alive. By the end of March, David decided to dispose of the body by dumping it off a cliff. However, the remains were discovered 2 days later, and authorities tracked him down within a week. At the trial, David expressed remorse and claimed that he loved Carol and had taken her life unintentionally. Despite his claims, the court found David guilty of manslaughter and sentenced him to 30 years in prison, ordering him to pay compensation to Carol's son, mother, and the father of her child. Surprisingly, the dismemberment of the body was not considered an aggravating factor, making David potentially eligible for parole. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Jolene Cummings. Jolene Cummings, a 34-year-old mother of 3, lived in Fernandina Beach and was going through a divorce from her husband, Jason. As part of their arrangement, Jason would pick up the children on weekends from their home in Fernandina Beach, where Jolene lived with them. Jolene worked as a hairdresser at Tangle's Hair Salon. On Saturday, May 12, 2018, she worked until 5 p.m. The next day was Mother's Day and also her 34th birthday. According to their plan, Jolene was supposed to meet Jason in the parking lot of the Winn-Dixie supermarket in Hilliard on Sunday to pick up the children. However, Jolene failed to show up, and Jason was unable to reach her by phone. Jolene's mother, Ann Johnson, also tried to contact her to wish her a happy birthday, but all her calls went straight to voicemail. Jason eventually called and to ask if she knew why Jolene hadn't arrived to pick up the children. Jolene failed to pick up her children, which was unusual behavior for her. Concerned, Ann reported Jolene missing to the police on Monday, May 14th, after being unable to contact Jolene. The police immediately launched an investigation and issued a missing person poster with Jolene's photo. They also put out an alert for her 2006 Ford Expedition. On the same day, police and volunteers searched the forest area near Jolene's home but found nothing. The police learned that Jolene was last seen leaving work at the Tangle's salon on Saturday, May 12. The salon's owner reported that Jolene and her coworker, Jennifer, had closed the salon together at 5 p.m. that day. According to Jennifer, they had each gotten into their own cars and driven away separately after work. The police discovered that Jolene's last phone activity was an outgoing call made while she was still at work on May 12. The police were determined to find a lead and began scrutinizing Jolene's personal life. They focused on her ex-boyfriend Jason, as spouses often turn against each other during divorce and custody battles. Meanwhile, detectives uncovered that 5 days before Jolene vanished, a neighbor reported a loud argument at Jolene's residence. The dispute was between Jolene and Jason, with their children present. Jason had asked Jolene to let him stay with her temporarily, but she refused, knowing the police were searching for him for violating his parole. In a fit of rage, Jason began destroying property. By the time the police arrived, Jason had seemingly escaped, but the truth was unclear. After Jolene disappeared, the police began to focus on Jason as a person of interest in her disappearance. On the second day of the investigation, May 15, 2018, several significant events unfolded. The police discovered Jason hiding in Jolene's house, where he had been since the day Jolene's neighbor reported a loud argument to the authorities. He was subsequently arrested and taken to the police station for questioning. During the interrogation, Jason claimed to have no involvement in Jolene's disappearance. Meanwhile, the police found a crucial lead. Jolene's SUV was discovered parked outside a Home Depot hardware store, just a few miles from her workplace. The vehicle showed no signs of damage or struggle. After a 2-day break, Jolene's salon reopened on May 15. At 10 a.m., the police visited the salon to speak with Jennifer Sibbert, the last person to see Jolene before the weekend. However, Jennifer didn't show up for work, claiming she had an urgent matter to attend to in another city. Thanks to CCTV footage, investigators made a breakthrough in Jolene's disappearance. The footage revealed Jolene's car entering the parking lot of a hardware store, where it was later found by the police. Notably, Jennifer had claimed that she and Jolene closed the salon together at 5 p.m. on May 12, but the CCTV footage showed Jolene's car arriving at the hardware store at 1:17 a.m. on May 13, a gap of 8 hours and 17 minutes. At a press conference, Sheriff Bill Leeper explained that the CCTV footage showed Jolene's car parking at 1:17 a.m. on Sunday. The video showed the driver waiting for a few minutes before getting out. But instead of seeing Jolene exit the car, the footage surprisingly showed Jennifer Sibbert, the same hairdresser who claimed to be the last person to see Jolene. After leaving Jolene's car, Jennifer went to the gas station across the street. The gas station footage shows Jennifer entering the store, where she purchased a bottle of water and requested that an employee call her a taxi. The taxi was later confirmed to have taken her to her workplace, a salon. According to the gas station employee, Jennifer appeared to be annoyed and had visible, fresh abrasions on her face. As a result, Jennifer Sibbert became the primary suspect in the investigation, and the police began searching for her. However, the address she had provided on her job application was found to be fake. Despite her attempts to hide, Jennifer was eventually found. On May 16, police officers spotted her black Kia Soul parked between two trucks in a recreation area, just 50 meters from the salon. Upon approaching the vehicle, the officers discovered Jennifer sleeping inside. Jennifer Sibbert was arrested and initially charged with stealing a car belonging to Jolene Cummings. When police brought her in for questioning, they noticed abrasions on her hands and face and asked her to explain them. She claimed she had been bitten by bed bugs. Further investigation revealed that she was homeless, often sleeping in her car and using a local fitness center shower. As investigators dug deeper, they made a surprising discovery that Jennifer Sibbert was not her real name. In fact, she was actually Kimberly Kessler, born in 1968 and reported missing in Pennsylvania in 2012. It turned out that she had been using the identity of Jennifer Marie Sibbert, a 13-year-old girl who had died in a car accident in Germany in 1987 and was buried in Pennsylvania. The investigation into Kimberly Kessler's case revealed a trail of deception dating back to 1996, when she began using stolen identities. At that time, she was living in Pennsylvania. Since then, Kessler has assumed at least 18 different identities and lived in 33 cities across 14 states. Many of these aliases bear similar names, which she often obtained by stealing names from gravestones and cemeteries. The police charged Kimberly Kessler with forgery after discovering she had been using fake names. A search of a storage unit she rented uncovered several suspicious items, including 4 wigs, a bag containing 2 cut-off hair tails, and 3 mobile phones. However, The most significant evidence was the discovery of Jolene Cummings's DNA on Kessler's sock and shoe. Additionally, scissors found in Kessler's car also contained Jolene's DNA. A review of Kessler's phone search history revealed that Kessler was preparing for Jolene's disappearance, which was not an accident. 2 weeks before Jolene vanished on May 12, Kessler searched for information on murder cases, including a query about a man who was charged with murder after his co-worker's remains were found in his yard. She also searched for information on co-workers who had been found guilty of murder, even when the victim's body had not been found. Kessler's search history also included queries about how to use a tourniquet, as well as information on female murderers in Florida and autopsy procedures. Furthermore, she searched for information on post-mortem changes, which suggests that she was trying to learn about what happens to the body after death. These search queries are particularly suspicious in light of a discovery made by the owner of the hair salon where Jolene worked. The owner reported that the plant in the salon had been replaced, which may be connected to Kessler's search for information on how to dispose of a body. On May 13, the day Jolene failed to pick up her kids, Kessler conducted internet searches at 12:05 p.m. for indoor palm and then at 12:06 p.m. for variation palm tree. The police analyzed CCTV footage from a nearby home goods store and found that Kessler visited the store on May 14 at 2:39 p.m. and left 30 minutes later with a palm plant, which was later found at the Tangles hair salon. Kessler's online searches continued, with Jolene Cummings I Have Vanished on May 15 at 6:13 p.m. and No Body No Crime on May 16 at 6:27 p.m. Forensic experts used luminol and ultraviolet light to examine the hair salon and discovered evidence of a serious crime, as the room glowed under the testing. On May 22, the sheriff announced during a press conference that they had gathered sufficient evidence to conclude that Jolene Cummings was dead, although some evidence was being withheld to protect the investigation. Further investigation revealed that Jolene had expressed concerns about her co-worker Jennifer, the new hairdresser, to another employee at the Tangles salon, stating that Jennifer seemed suspicious and was hiding something. This conversation took place about a week before Jolene's disappearance. Witnesses reported that Jolene and Jennifer had a tense relationship, and one person even saw them arguing on May 9, just 3 days before Jolene vanished. The Tangles hair salon eventually closed on June 5, 2018. The hair salon footage shows of Kessler visiting the dumpster at least 4 times. In the first footage, taken shortly after midnight, Kessler is seen doing something near the dumpster. At 8:08 a.m., she returns to throw away a heavy-looking white garbage bag. 14 minutes later, she disposes of another similar bag. The final footage, taken an hour before midnight, shows Kessler lifting a waste container to empty its contents, suggesting it also holds something heavy. The Walmart security footage revealed what Kessler had thrown away in the dumpster. The video showed her purchasing items at the self-checkout, including garbage bags, cleaning supplies, latex gloves, and an electric knife. This discovery led the police to investigate further. They found that a local waste management company was taking trash to a landfill in Georgia. In July 2018, nearly 200 people searched the landfill for a week, but the sheriff did not disclose what they found, citing the ongoing investigation. Near the dumpster where Kessler disposed of the white garbage bags, the police discovered a piece of jewelry, women's shoes, and a blue plastic container that matched one found in Kessler's storage unit. The container contained Jolene Cummings's DNA. Although Jolene's body was not found, the police had sufficient evidence to arrest Kessler for her murder. Kessler's first court appearance was on January 17, 2019, where she pleaded not guilty. However, the trial was delayed for several years due to concerns about Kessler's sanity. She went on a hunger strike, losing significant weight, and her court appearances often ended in outbursts of anger. In 2021, Kessler underwent mandatory treatment before the court session, and she was eventually deemed competent to stand trial. During a press conference, Sheriff Leeper made a statement saying that they were sending Kessler to Florida State Prison, where she would spend the rest of her life. Sadly, Jolene Cummings's body has never been recovered or found. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Nicholas Wilcox. Nicholas Wilcox, a 39-year-old man from Putnam, Connecticut, lives in a duplex apartment, a popular property type in Florida that is designed for two families, with separate rooms, yards, and entrances. Isabella, a 38-year-old woman from Brazil, was the first person invited to rent one of the vacant apartments by Nicholas Wilcox. She used to work as a flight attendant for a national airline in Brazil. After getting divorced in 2010, she moved to America with her children and later married an American, which helped her obtain a green card. Isabella's marriage ended in 2016, and she started dating Eric Robinson, a 46-year-old man from Massachusetts who had never been married and had no children. Despite their romantic feelings for each other, their relationship was occasionally turbulent due to their passionate nature and Eric's bachelor lifestyle. According to Isabella, Eric's behavior was inconsistent and unpredictable, switching between cheerfulness and aggression without warning. This led to repeated breakups and makeups. By June 2017, they had separated once again, shortly before Eric and Isabella moved in with Nicholas. Initially, the living arrangement worked well, with Nicholas and Isabella and Eric respecting each other's space while also spending quality time together. However, over time, problems arose. It was discovered that Eric was using and storing illicit substances, which explained his erratic mood swings. This behavior led to Eric's arrest on August 23, 2017. Nicholas was fortunate to have a steady stream of work, unlike Isabella, who struggled to find a suitable job. To make ends meet, she started helping her neighbor in the construction business. It's worth noting that Nicholas's family had a long history of working in similar trades. His grandfather was a fisherman and boat builder, while his father dedicated his life to construction. After graduating in 1996, Nicholas joined the family business, becoming a roofer. He worked alongside his older brother, Donald, as contractors, building their own client base. At 23, Nicholas started a family with his high school classmate, Kathy. They had a daughter a year later, and twins 3 years after that. Throughout this time, Nicholas worked hard to provide for his family. Despite his busy schedule, friends and acquaintances remembered him as a devoted husband and father. However, his dedication to his professional pursuits may have contributed to the eventual breakdown of his family. They divorced shortly after the birth of their younger children. Despite this, Nicholas continued to support and communicate with his family. In 2017, Nicholas made a fresh start by moving to Florida to pursue better job opportunities. The new location proved to be a smart choice, as he saw a significant increase in clients. Unlike his previous seasonal work, Nicholas was now able to earn a steady income almost year-round. As a professional, Nicholas's skills were in high demand in Florida, where powerful hurricanes frequently damaged homes along the coast during storm season. His expertise was needed to reinforce and repair homes, which helped him build a successful business. Despite leaving his family back in Connecticut, Nicholas remained committed to caring for his children from a distance, sending them financial support and visiting whenever possible, as per his agreement with his ex-wife. After living in a multi-apartment complex in Fort Lauderdale, Nicholas moved to the suburbs to lower his housing costs. This is when he met Isabella. As the hurricane season began, Nicholas's workload increased significantly due to daily orders. At the same time, Hurricane Irma was approaching the area where Nicholas lived and worked. An emergency was declared, and about 7 million people were evacuated from coastal areas. To prepare for the storm, Nicholas spent his time reinforcing homes, boarding up windows and doors, and later clearing the debris left behind. Nicholas's main job was to help people, and he got paid for it. But he wasn't in it just for the money. His older brother said that Nicholas always lent a hand to those in need. In September 2017, Florida was bracing for a devastating hurricane. Nicholas spent the day boarding up windows with plywood to prepare. As a result, there was a shortage of plywood in stores, leading to long lines of people waiting to buy some. At that time, Nicholas met a woman named Pamela, who was struggling to find materials to protect her home. Nicholas promised to help her, and that evening, he delivered the 7 sheets of plywood she needed. He then spent the whole day boarding up her doors and windows, refusing payment for his efforts. Nicholas was deeply sympathetic to Pamela's plight as a single mother in need of assistance. In response, he offered her help, and she was extremely grateful. This sparked a romantic connection between them. The devastating hurricane that followed brought Nicholas a substantial amount of work, which allowed him to employ his neighbor, Isabella, as his assistant. Isabella's responsibilities included cleaning up job sites and handing Nicholas tools as needed. As they spent more time together, their friendly interactions blossomed into romance. On September 3rd, they made a commitment to each other, sealing their promise with a handwritten vow in blood, symbolizing their desire for a long, happy life together, filled with many children. The lovers, Nicholas and Isabella, faced minor issues and disagreements soon after their union. These disputes escalated, culminating in a serious conflict on September 22nd, which led Isabella to leave home and spend the night in a hotel. However, they reconciled the next morning. According to Isabella, Nicholas was neglecting her and showing a lack of respect. Nicholas, on the other hand, believed she was exaggerating. Their disagreements ultimately led to severe consequences. On October 5, 2017, a mysterious call was made to the local police. The caller claimed to be Isabella's former husband and asked the police to contact Isabella, stating she had information about a recent crime. However, he didn't provide further details. The police responded promptly and called Isabella, who sounded hysterical. When questioned about the situation, she claimed everything was fine, except for a fight with her boyfriend, Nicholas. Isabella told the police that her partner had left her and driven away, but when they mentioned a call from her former husband, she broke down and confessed that her partner was actually dead. She claimed to know where the body was and offered to show them. When the police arrived at the address Isabella provided, they found a house that was being prepared for a hurricane, with all windows and doors boarded up. Inside, they noticed a strong smell of cleaning products and paint, indicating that one of the bedrooms had been thoroughly cleaned. However, upon closer inspection, the detectives suspected that someone was trying to cover something up. The walls and floor had been hastily and sloppily painted, and they found containers of hydrogen peroxide, which is often used to clean bloodstains. They discovered small bloodstains on the bedding and bedside table, and it was clear that the old mattress had been replaced. The police found blood stains throughout the room, suggesting a violent crime had taken place. Isabella had attempted to clean up the scene but hadn't finished before the police arrived. Isabella was discovered inside the duplex, visibly distressed, and explained that she had been under the influence of a sedative during the phone call with her ex-husband, which accounted for her unusual behavior. Despite her initial confusion, Isabella confirmed that she knew what had happened in the room and where the body was located. Due to her unstable state, the police decided to take her to the station for further questioning. Meanwhile, the police had spoken with her ex-husband again, who provided a partial account of the events. According to Isabella's ex-husband, she had called him and told him about the crime. However, during her interrogation, Isabella claimed that her former boyfriend, Eric Robinson, was involved in the crime. She stated that on October 5th, Around 2 a.m., Eric had arrived at the duplex, found her and Nicholas asleep, and became enraged by a vow hanging above the bed's headboard in the bedroom. Eric woke Isabella by holding a knife to her throat, threatening to harm her if she screamed. As he did, she saw Nicholas, who was lying next to her, struggling to breathe. But Eric didn't allow her to look any further and forced her out of the bedroom. Then, he brutally beat Nicholas, who was defenseless, using a brass knuckle and the bat. After the beating, Eric wrapped Nicholas' body in a tarp and tied it up with straps. He threatened Isabella, forcing her to help him get rid of the body. Later, the detectives were confused as to why Isabella, instead of calling the police, had called her ex-husband. In an explanation, Isabella said she was terrified and sought comfort and guidance. According to her, Eric also made her clean up the crime scene and erase all evidence. Before leaving, he returned her phone, which he had taken earlier. Her confession raised doubts and required further investigation. Additionally, the detectives noticed visible bruises and scratches on Isabella's body, which she claimed were a result of Eric beating her after Nicholas' death. The investigation started with a search for the victim and the suspect, who revealed the location of Nicholas. While medical examiners worked on the body, forensic specialists arrived at the scene. Meanwhile, law enforcement searched for Eric, who had been released from prison on October 3rd and was living at a different address. During this time, Eric had met a woman, Merida, and was staying with her. Merida told the police that on the night of October 5th, her boyfriend received a phone call and left immediately. He returned around 5 a.m., packed his things, and left again without explanation. When asked if she noticed any bloodstains on her boyfriend's clothes, Merida said she hadn't seen anything suspicious. Eric was found around 8 p.m., 4 miles away from the house. He refused to cooperate with the investigation and was taken into custody for further inquiry. During the interrogation, Eric provided a different account of the events than Isabella's. According to Eric, Isabella had contacted him on the night of October 5th, despite having a restraining order against him. Isabella attacked Nicholas while under the influence of banned substances and ultimately ended his life. After regaining her composure, she realized she needed help and asked Eric to assist her. In exchange, she promised to rekindle their relationship and start anew. Eric, still having strong feelings for her, agreed to her terms. The investigation revealed that Isabella was not as innocent as she seemed. She had a history of police encounters, and on September 22nd, a heated argument with Nicholas got out of hand. Under the influence of Xanax and other substances, Isabella became violent, destroying some of Nicholas' belongings and damaging his work vehicle. Fearing for his life, Nicholas contacted the police. Although they reconciled the next morning and Nicholas dropped the complaint, investigators discovered Isabella's history of erratic behavior, including a conversation with her ex-husband that shed more light on her past. He described Isabella as having a volatile personality and a hot temper. During their argument, he had threatened to report her to immigration services if she continued to behave in such a manner. For Isabella, the opportunity to live in the U.S. was crucial, so the threat of deportation was devastating. It's possible that during another argument, Isabella's explosive personality led her to react violently, motivated by her desire to stay in America. To gather more information, detectives started interviewing people close to them. A neighbor who lived in the adjacent duplex proved to be a crucial witness. She reported seeing Eric arrive at the scene in his car on the night of the crime. He then retrieved some tools and trash bags before leaving the area. The investigation continued, with substantial evidence collected. On October 11th, Isabella was called in for another interrogation, which she attended voluntarily since she had not been arrested at that point. Detectives reviewed video surveillance footage and determined that on the night of the incident, Isabella personally moved Nicholas's body and disposed of it in a trash container. During this time, she remained calm and composed, making decisions independently. She also met with Eric Robinson that night. Isabella appeared relaxed and friendly. She even purchased items needed for emergency repairs herself. However, as the investigation progressed, she began to change her story, adding new details about the events. Isabella claimed that Eric had threatened to kill her and deport her and her children, forcing her to act as she did. Although her statement seemed believable, investigators were cautious in their conclusions. Both Eric and Isabella had questionable pasts, which raised suspicions. Eric, in particular, had a history of run-ins with the law, dating back to 2001, primarily for possession and distribution of narcotics. In August 2016, Isabella had legitimate reasons to fear Eric in question, as he had committed an aggravated assault against a woman. In June 2017, he was arrested for strangulation and later that year for possessing prohibited substances. Eric's neighbors were terrified of him due to his aggressive and unpredictable behavior, and they actively avoided him. On October 14, experts discovered traces of Isabella's DNA on the Nicholas body, contradicting her claim of not having touched Nicholas. This evidence suggested that she was involved in the violent crime against her lover, at the very least in disposing of the body and eliminating evidence. Despite the evidence, neither Isabella or Eric admitted to any wrongdoing. While Eric was held in custody, Isabella was briefly detained before being released to await trial. Although everyone expected the court proceedings to begin soon, various complications and delays pushed the trial back by 5 years. The trial of Eric Robinson was significantly delayed due to the bureaucratic issues. During this time, the prosecution developed its strategy and tactics, while the defense thoroughly reviewed the investigation findings. Additionally, new evidence was discovered, including the recovery of Eric's deleted social media account, which he had used to discuss the crime with his former friend. As the trial approached, Isabella made a plea deal with the prosecution. She agreed to testify against Eric Robinson. On April 10, 2023, the trial finally took place. The prosecution argued that Eric was solely responsible for the crime against Nicholas, while Isabella's role was presented as a witness who tampered with evidence and helped eliminate traces, a crime in itself. The trial was marked by several cancellations due to legal complexities, but resumed after a week. Throughout the trial, Eric was charged with premeditated murder. Despite inconsistencies in Isabella's testimonies, her attorney maintained her innocence. The prosecution emphasized witness statements describing Eric's unusual behavior on the night of the crime. Specifically, Eric used his new girlfriend's car, which didn't have GPS tracking, to avoid detection. He also left his mobile phone at home to prevent tracking. Separately, other case details came to light. After the crime, Eric and Isabella were together in a room nearby, where they were intimate. Isabella later explained her actions, stating she was under the influence of strong sedatives at the time and also feared for her life after what had happened. The motive behind the brutal and senseless murder of Nicholas was revealed to be jealousy. Although Isabella had ended their relationship, Eric still considered her his girlfriend. When he was released from prison, he returned home to find that significant changes had taken place in his absence, which only fueled his rage and hatred. During this time, Eric plotted his revenge against his perceived rival. He committed a cold-blooded attack while Nicholas was asleep and vulnerable, sealing his fate with the first strike. Eric then attempted to cover his tracks by scattering evidence in various locations. The murder weapon was later found in a landfill, and Nicholas's body was discovered wrapped in tarpaulin and hidden in a trash container. Isabella, following Eric's instructions, painted over the blood-splattered walls and cleaned the area to conceal the evidence. Ultimately, 51-year-old Eric was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole for second-degree murder. Isabella was found guilty of aiding Eric, but the court considered threats and coercion as mitigating circumstances. As a result, she received a suspended sentence and is on probation until 2026. Isabella was willing to do whatever it took to gain U.S. citizenship. Just 10 days after Eric was incarcerated, the parties signed another agreement in which Eric promised to marry Isabella. However, he failed to follow through on this promise. It seems that Isabella is willing to marry anyone as long as it helps her maintain her status. All the men she has been involved with have been used for her own selfish purposes, and she has manipulated them into considering marriage. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Kaler family. The story of the Kaler family begins with James Craig Kaler, born in 1963 in Weatherford, Texas. His future wife, Karen Kaler, née White, was born in the same city in 1965. They met in the early 1980s as students at a Texas university. Craig was graduating in engineering, while Karen was a freshman in the humanities department. They quickly found common ground and soon began a romantic relationship. They were young, in love, and, by all appearances, the perfect couple. Craig was known for his determination and talent in engineering during his university years. In the late 1980s, after graduation, they had a modest wedding attended only by close friends and family. Their first child, Emily, was born in 1991, followed by Lauren in 1993. The family lived in a cozy house in Weatherford and were quite well off by local standards. In 1999, when Karen was expecting her third child, Craig received a lucrative job offer at a large utility company in Weatherford. His promotion coincided with the birth of their son, Sean, whom he adored. With a higher income, Craig purchased a spacious house in the city's most prestigious neighborhood and acquired a reliable family car. Karen stayed at home, and Craig became the primary breadwinner. Outwardly, the family appeared perfect. The daughters, Emily and Lauren, were talented in sports and music. They often participated in vocal competitions and local events. Emily excelled in school and was accepted into a prestigious pharmacy college. Lauren, an excellent student, dreamed of attending a conservatory to pursue a career in music. Sean was an outgoing, kind, and inquisitive boy interested in pneumatics. He aspired to become an archaeologist. He was very close to his parents and sisters. Craig provided for his family, while Karen made the home comfortable, raised the children, and baked tasty treats. They were active in the community and continuously strived to improve their neighborhood. They raised 3 wonderful and talented children. However, behind the facade of perfection lay numerous problems that family members kept hidden. In 2007, Karen admitted to her younger sister Linda that she was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. She revealed that Craig had been controlling and monitoring her for years, a control that was increasing. Craig demanded detailed accounts of all expenditures, not just major purchases, but everyday household expenses as well. Karen provided him with supermarket receipts, bank transaction data, and reported her whereabouts daily while he was at work. The entire Kaler family lived on a strict schedule set by Craig. When he returned home from work, his wife and children had to be there to meet him promptly. They adhered to precise times for going to bed, waking up, and eating meals. Even intimacy between the couple was scheduled. Over time, Craig's obsession with control intensified. He became increasingly demanding and selfish. Karen's actions were scheduled down to the hour. She felt enslaved by his demands. The narrative reflects an ostensibly perfect picture, but reveals underlying difficulties faced by each member of this seemingly ideal family. She had no free time, only duties and responsibilities. She tried to fulfill all of her husband's demands, hoping that he would loosen his control. They wanted to get back to their old life, but Craig seemed to enjoy his control and was unwilling to change. Linda was deeply disturbed by her sister's revelations. Like everyone else, she had seen Craig as the perfect husband, father, and family man. It turned out he was a domestic tyrant. However, Karen did not want to destroy her family. Besides, she and her children were financially dependent on Craig. Therefore, she decided to find a job that would provide her with a stable income. Despite her advanced age and 3 children, Karen was in great physical shape. She always adhered to good nutrition principles, periodically followed diets, and took care of herself. Every day, she went jogging. Secretly from her husband, she enrolled in a local fitness club where she started working out for several hours each day. It was her way of blowing off steam, distracting herself, and getting her thoughts in order. She attended the gym while Craig was at work and didn't notice him watching her workout sessions occasionally. Soon, the management of the sports club noticed the attractive, fit, and diligent woman. Karen was offered an opportunity to try herself as a fitness instructor with a probationary period and the possibility of an official labor contract. The former housewife could not have dreamed of such an opportunity because now she could continue doing what she loved and even receive decent remuneration for it. Eventually, Craig found out that his wife was going to the gym regularly. Karen assumed that her husband would forbid her from attending. But surprisingly, he reacted calmly. He even seemed pleased that his wife had found something meaningful to do and was now earning her own money. His only conditions were that she must be home when he arrived, cook meals continually, and not disrupt their intimate life plans. Karen found these conditions acceptable because now she had freedom of action and the ability to provide for herself without having to justify every dime spent to her husband. There was a new instructor at the fitness club named Sunny Rice. Karen and Sunny quickly became friends. For Karen, who had been a stay-at-home mom for many years and had few opportunities to socialize outside the family, Sunny became a trusted confidant. The women spent time together at work every day. Sometimes they went for walks, drank coffee, and had heartfelt conversations. Their friendship soon evolved into something more profound. Naturally, they kept their feelings and relationship a secret from everyone. Eventually, Karen felt the need to disclose everything to her husband. She spent months preparing for this conversation, struggling to find the right words and contemplating the potential consequences. Finally, she opened up to Craig. Although Craig was puzzled by his wife's revelation, he remained calm and composed. He did not react dramatically. However, the next day, Craig expressed that he agreed with his wife's relationship with Sunny, but on one condition, that he wanted to join them. Nonetheless, Craig took the initiative and began acquainting Sunny by sending her flowers and small gifts. He appeared to view this as an opportunity to enhance his intimate life and inject new passion into his marriage with Karen. Their unusual love triangle did not last long before it became clear that Craig was not welcome in their relationship. Feeling insulted, Craig demanded that Karen end the relationship with Sunny immediately. However, Karen continued to see Sunny as she was genuinely in love. After nearly 2 decades of marriage, it seemed Karen was ready to leave her husband for this new relationship, a significant move involving secrecy and considerations of relocating to another state. Following months of scandals, confrontations, and agonizing deliberations, Craig concluded that the best way to save his family would be to relocate out of state. He began searching for a new job and soon secured a position as a water director for a large company in Columbia, Missouri, a city near Kansas. In the summer of 2008, the family's move proved challenging. The children had to switch schools, make new friends, and adapt to life in a different city. Although the family was financially stable, Craig's new position came with nearly double his previous salary in Weatherford. However, this increase in earnings brought more responsibilities and longer working hours. Craig believed that this change would end Sunny's influence in his wife's life. However, his assumption was incorrect. Karen and Sunny continued to communicate frequently through phone calls, texts, and clandestine meetings. They would drive to meet halfway and spend a few hours in roadside hotels before heading back home. By then, Karen realized her marriage was beyond repair. She no longer loved her husband. Divorce was imminent. These secret meetings persisted until December 2008. On New Year's Eve, the Kaler family returned to their hometown to visit relatives and friends. Sunny attended the same party. Initially, Karen and Sunny kept a low profile, merely exchanging greetings. However, as the evening wore on and alcohol took its toll, they seemed to forget social conventions. The lovers were inseparable, holding hands, exchanging longing glances, and some guests even noticed them kissing. Craig felt not only anger, but also fury at this public behavior. Karen had insulted and humiliated him in front of numerous former roommates, friends, and co-workers by making her affair public. Craig caused a scene at the party by verbally attacking both his wife and Sonny. In a fit of rage, Craig forcibly dragged Karen away from the gathering. On their way home, he lost control of himself entirely, grabbing her by the shoulders and shaking her so violently that her dress tore. He then slapped her hard enough for her to stumble and hit her head forcefully. Upon returning home, the conflict didn't diminish, it intensified over time. A few days later, Karen informed Craig of her decision to leave him. She initiated divorce proceedings and demanded custody of their children. Initially, Craig attempted to apologize, pleading to keep the family intact for the sake of the children and proposing to give their marriage another chance. However, Karen was resolute and obtained a divorce. Craig subsequently began contacting mutual friends and relatives, requesting them to persuade Karen not to break up the family and stay with him. Despite his efforts, she firmly told him that she was leaving for Sonny and had never been truly happy in their marriage. In early spring 2009, while they were still residing under the same roof, another argument erupted. Craig resorted to physical violence for the first time since that New Year's Eve party. Karen reported him to the police, leading to his arrest. At the station, he claimed his wife was hysterical and that he merely held her tightly to calm her down, which caused the bruises on her arms. Following this incident, without waiting for an official divorce, Karen moved out with the children. This development was a serious blow for Craig, but even more so when he learned that his daughters sided with their mother. They mentioned seeing her happy for the first time in a long time. He perceived this as a betrayal and refused to communicate with Emily and Lauren, only calling Sean and taking him on weekends while blatantly ignoring his daughters. Meanwhile, despite ongoing divorce proceedings, Craig still hoped his wife would reconsider and return to him. He displayed jealousy, tried to control her movements, and even followed her around town in a rental car in an attempt to remain undetected. Additionally, he attempted setting up a hidden camera in her house when no one was present. Naturally, all of these activities took time and effort, forcing Craig to sacrifice work. Initially, he took a vacation, then he claimed illness, and eventually started skipping work without explanation. This behavior led to his termination from employment. After losing his job and primary source of income, Craig moved into his parents' house as he could no longer afford his own accommodations. With plenty of free time, he managed to stalk his ex-wife all day. This behavior pushed her to take him to court to prevent him from approaching her. On the evening of November 29th, the Burling Police Department received an alarming call about a suspicious van and the sound of gunshots. Dorothy's neighbors mentioned seeing a small truck pull up at the elderly woman's home. They observed a man get out and enter the house. After that, they heard screams and gunshots, but were unsure about what transpired exactly. The man then exited the house, got back into his truck, and drove away swiftly. The neighbors didn't try to apprehend him as they feared he was armed. When police arrived at the scene, they encountered a terrified 10-year-old boy crying for help, Sean Kaler, who couldn't explain what had happened, but made it clear that something terrifying awaited inside. Near the front door, police discovered Dorothy lying in a pool of blood. Surprisingly, she was still alive, despite enduring 2 gunshot wounds. In the kitchen, Karen's lifeless body, she had been shot in the chest and then fatally shot in the head at close range by her ex-husband. Karen's oldest daughter, 18-year-old Emily, was found between a wall and a couch. She had apparently tried hiding from her enraged father, but was caught and shot twice at point-blank range. Her younger sister Lauren was discovered in a bedroom on another floor. She too was covered in blood, but still alive, faintly pleading for help and repeatedly indicating it was her father who did this. The elderly woman and Lauren were immediately rushed to an intensive care unit at a nearby hospital. Despite doctors' best efforts, their lives could not be saved. Lauren succumbed to massive blood loss and damage to her internal organs on December 1st morning, while her great-grandmother passed away just hours later that day. The only surviving witness, Sean, was deeply traumatized. Psychologists began working with him immediately. Sean required a comprehensive interview as he was the sole surviving witness to the tragic events at his great-grandmother's house. He stated that on that evening, his mother was in the kitchen preparing dinner while he approached her to request his favorite pies. Suddenly, the back door of the house swung open, and their father entered, holding a shotgun. Without uttering a word, the man aimed the gun at his ex-wife and fired. He then moved closer and shot her again. Initially, Sean froze in terror. His father turned toward him but did not aim. Rather, he stared silently and intently at him. Realizing the imminent danger, Sean knew he had to flee. He bolted through the open back door. The boy ran towards the main entrance with hopes of alerting his grandmother and sisters to call for help. However, as he reached the threshold, several more gunshots rang out. Afraid to enter the house, he hid in a small outbuilding and waited in dread for his father to come after him. Where was Mr. Kaler? Craig was immediately put on the wanted list, with warnings indicating he was armed and extremely dangerous. Meanwhile, police received several reports of a speeding truck, which aided them in quickly determining the direction in which the gunman was traveling. At one point, Kaler abandoned his vehicle in a wooded area and began walking down an isolated road. Law enforcement authorities soon caught up with him and apprehended him by morning. Kaler had left the rifle and ammunition in the back seat of his vehicle. Prescription medication for depression and anxiety disorders lay next to the driver's seat. Kaler did not resist arrest, nor seemed concerned about what would happen next. He appeared confused, even frightened, and openly admitted to being armed with a gun and hunting knife, but claimed he had no intention of using them further. He also confessed that he had committed a horrific act that he believed police were already aware of by then. Following this admission, when taken to the police station, Craig confessed his guilt and poured his heart out to the investigating. He revealed how his wife had cheated on him with Sonny and how they had humiliated him in front of his friends at a Year's Eve party. His efforts to save his marriage had cost him his job and stripped away what was left of his respect. The man cried, admitting he did not understand how he had decided to take such drastic steps, and lamented that everyone, including his daughters, had betrayed him. The trial began in December 2010. Craig, advised by his lawyer Thomas Heaney, recanted his initial confession, blaming his actions on mental illness and insanity. It was the only option to avoid the death penalty for the murder of 4 people. Heaney attempted to convince the court that Craig was in a difficult emotional state after being abandoned by his wife for her lover. His children sided with their mother. He lost his job. He had to move back into his parents' home. All these factors contributed to Craig's breakdown, argued the lawyer, insisting that Mr. Kaler committed the crime while insane and not realizing what he was doing. Prior to 1995, there was a law allowing criminals in such cases leniency if they pleaded. However, in Kansas, where both the crime happened and hence where the trial took place, that law had been repealed. Additionally, no evidence of Craig being insane or in an altered state during the acts was found by the prosecution. What emerged instead was cold calculation. Craig bought guns and ammunition ahead of time and purposefully went to Dorothy White's house, knowing his entire family would be there. Each victim was shot twice without any chance of survival. However, he deliberately spared his son, Sean's life. In August 2011, Craig was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to death. 12-year-old Sean testified at the final hearing that he did not wish for his father's death, as Craig remained his closest living relative. Despite numerous appeals by Craig and his attorneys, the verdict remained unchanged. As of today, Mr. Kaler is still in prison, fighting to have the case reviewed and seeking overturning of the death sentence. Regarding Sean is now an adult who has finished school, obtained an education, and chosen to stay and work in his home state. Brad Sickett came into this world on March 3, 1976, in the quaint town of Kingman, Kansas, USA. As the only child of Janet Sickett and her husband, whose name and details from his previous marriage remain strictly confidential, Brad had an interesting family dynamic. Janet had another son, Robert, from her previous marriage, making Robert Brad's older half-brother. The Sickett family had deep roots in law enforcement, resulting in a household characterized by strict discipline. Though information about Brad's childhood is scarce, it is documented that he attended high school in Kingman. Brad was tall and sturdy, traits that enabled him to pursue wrestling and bodybuilding during his high school years. His dedication to physical fitness soon paid off, as he excelled in various inter-school tournaments, often securing first place. This success turned him into a star wrestler and a notable figure within his school. At 16, while competing at a major wrestling event in the Kansas City Coliseum, Brad met a girl named Vashti Forrest. Born on March 21, 1977, in Argonne, Seward County, Vashti was Julie Hostler and Clinton Forrest's third child. She had an older brother named Rich and an older sister named Catherine. A younger sister named Tyler completed their family. Vashti possessed a noble spirit and enjoyed the affectionate support of her siblings, especially Catherine and Rich, who treated her with special care. In contrast, Julie wasn't particularly affectionate and often verbally abused her children. Despite these challenges at home, Vashti's outgoing personality earned her a large circle of friends. Though she received much love from those around her, Vashti struggled with self-esteem issues. She didn't feel beautiful or intelligent enough, and often sought approval from others. This quest for approval sometimes undermined her confidence. Nonetheless, Vashti became a cheerleader for her school's wrestling team, a role she loved passionately. She never missed any matches, which led to her fateful encounter with Brad at one such event. Brad immediately caught Vashti's eye. She was deeply attracted to him from their first meeting. He instantly asked her out, fascinated by his boldness. The girl yes, and they both felt it during that initial meeting. From then on, they became inseparable. After graduation, the girl went to the University of UO, and the guy honored his family traditions by joining the police academy. However, during this period, they spent less time together, which profoundly affected Brett, who was already starting to show signs of a controlling and irascible nature. His increasing jealousy eventually became too much for Vashti to handle. Tired and overwhelmed, she decided to end the relationship. The breakup was neither violent nor traumatic. Both went on with their lives. After graduating from the police academy, Brett joined the sheriff's department in Sedgwick County, just 50 kilometers from Kingman. Despite time passing and achieving career milestones, he couldn't forget Vashti. Deep down, he still loved her and never gave up the hope of reuniting with her. When an opportunity presented itself, he visited her and shared how regularly attending church had transformed him into a new man through his faith. Brett's words appeared sincere to Vashti, perhaps due to faith or genuine love, leading her to decide to return to him. Overjoyed by her decision, Brett didn't want any delays. He informed her family of his intentions and asked for her hand in marriage. Her parents, Julie and Clinton Forrest, were delighted by this news. They believed Brett and Vashti made a wonderful couple and anticipated a happy marriage. The wedding took place in 2004. Brett and Vashti settled in a peaceful neighborhood in Kingman, where they made new friends, including Monty Weldon, a friendly neighbor who frequently invited them to barbecues in his garden. It seemed like the perfect setting for establishing their new home. However, sometimes Vashti noticed that Brett's unpleasant side resurfaced sporadically. Problems cropped up repeatedly due to his dominant disposition. When Vashti became pregnant, though, these differences seemed to fade away temporarily. In fall 2006, their first son Brandon was born. 2 years later, came another son named Bronson. The experience of recent parenthood brought about a realization for both of them. The inherent risks associated with Brett's job as a police officer, along with the required careful planning for their children's future welfare if one of them were ever absent. After thorough consideration and analysis of their situation, they chose guardianship arrangements for Brandon and Bronson should it ever become necessary. Brett's brother, Robert, worked as a trainer at the police facility in Vashi. Meanwhile, she dedicated herself fully to raising their children and managing household chores. In her spare moments, she penned down her feelings in a diary. Although Brett was a loving and devoted father, his behavior could be somewhat rough with the children during playtime, often treating them like adults. Even though Brett's violent tendencies appeared controlled, it seemed they were waiting to break free. One day at work, Brett used excessive force to subdue an inmate by slamming his head against a concrete wall. The victim sustained a fractured skull and brain damage and died a few days later. Brett faced a lawsuit for excessive use of force, but received full support from his boss, Sheriff Gary Steve. The prosecutor's office and the Kansas Bureau of Investigation dismissed the complaint, clearing him of all charges. Brett did not show remorse. Instead, he admitted to colleagues that he enjoyed violence, especially when punishing those he deemed bad people. Later on, Brett and another officer forcibly subdued a defendant who had lost control and resisted removal from the courtroom for contempt of court. This action drew praise and resulted in both officers receiving a bronze medal from the sheriff for their meritorious behavior. Despite Vashi's love for her children, she still had career aspirations. Recognizing the emptiness she felt inside, she sought and secured employment as the new human resources manager at Vito's communications company. Brett took this development ambivalently. Ideally, he wanted his wife to focus solely on household duties and the education of their children, Brendan and Bronson. It wasn't long before he began to complain about Vashi spending too much time at work, a role he didn't accept her having in the first place. Consequently, their arguments increased significantly. For the sake of their children's well-being, Vashi made extensive efforts to mend their marriage, but felt it was all in vain. She had an intuition that this situation would end badly. With the aim of resolving their conflicts, Vashi and Brett began seeing Connie Sodman, a clinical social worker, during initial sessions. Vashi expressed feelings of profound loneliness and isolation, considering couples therapy as a potential last effort to salvage their marriage. However, when she broached the topic of divorce, Brett became extremely upset, resulting in weeks of psychological harassment. He threatened to kill her if she attempted to leave, claiming he could manipulate her death to appear as a suicide because of his position as a police officer. He even mentioned the possibility of burning down their home to destroy any evidence. In the days that followed, Brett had a one-on-one meeting with Kai, in which he declared furiously that if Vashi continued pursuing divorce, he would ensure she never saw their children, Brendan or Bronson, again. He further vowed that he wouldn't hesitate to take them out of the country. In early 2011, Brett transitioned from patrolling the streets to becoming a self-defense instructor at the Kansas Law Enforcement Training Center. Meanwhile, Vashi began feeling much better than she had in recent years. She continued therapy and implemented healthy changes such as exercising regularly and improving her diet. The decision to divorce gradually became more definite for Vashi. While she felt sadness about the end of her marriage, she predominantly experienced relief and optimism regarding her future. To enhance the effects of physical activity, she started taking an appetite suppressant, despite knowing it might have side effects like depression. Within a few months, Vashi's social life became very active. She expanded her contacts at work and met someone she found attractive. She confided in her older sister Kathleen about her fears concerning Brett's discovery of her plans due to potential repercussions. Vashi also spoke candidly with her coworkers about various threats from Brett. During this time, Brett discovered Vashi was keeping a personal diary without her knowledge and took it to his office to scan and print some pages. He spent considerable time researching information on suicides, fire-related injuries, homicides versus suicides, and their causes. In the first week of April 2011, Vashti attended a final individual session with Kai due to concerns about how Brett would respond upon receiving the divorce petition. Together, they developed a protection plan for herself and their children. When the man received the papers, Brett arrived at his office on the morning of 29th. To his surprise, he found an envelope containing divorce papers. After lunch, he discovered a projector in the pantry. He used it to project handwriting from Vash's diary, traced it, and then wrote a goodbye note to his children. At the same time, Brett printed out documents on how to kill a person and pass it off as suicide. He then asked the maintenance staff how best to dispose of computer hard drives. After researching their recommendations, Brett used a blowtorch to destroy them because they contained scanned images. Following this, he threw the waste into a dumpster. Later on, Brett drove to a convenience store and bought gasoline, which he loaded into his van. Several hours later, he pleaded with Vashti to let him spend the night at home to say goodbye to his children. The man promised to leave the next morning. Although they discussed joint finances, Brett again begged Vashti to change her mind about the divorce. However, when he saw she was determined to proceed, he soon renewed his threats. Exhausted from fruitless arguments, Vashti retired to her room to sleep while Brett stayed downstairs on the couch. Around 3:15 a.m., he went upstairs with a gun in his hand and shot Vashti in the neck. A neighbor who was awake watching television heard the shot, but did not pay much attention. Meanwhile, Brett placed the next to Vashti's lifeless body and staged the scene to fake a suicide. He then doused the hallway and bedroom with gasoline and took her cell phone, calling himself from it. Subsequently, he took Brendan and Bronson to a safe house. When everything was ready, he started the fire. The flames quickly engulfed the main room and caused cartridges still in the chamber of the gun to start firing. Neighbors woke up startled at around 3:45 a.m., initially thinking there was a shooting. By 3:57 a.m., 911 operators received a desperate call from Brett, who said that his wife had shot herself. When emergency responders arrived on scene, they found the first floor of the house burning with Brett outside in Vashti's car, along with his children. A police officer asked if anyone was in the house, and Brett replied that his wife was still inside. He further claimed that Vashti had shot herself due to depression, but had asked him beforehand to take their children somewhere safe. He stated that although he tried to save her, smoke and fire prevented him from doing so. When firefighters managed to control the flames, they found Vashti's body in the master bedroom. There on the bed, just below the body, investigators found a .44 caliber revolver with the barrel toward her feet and a 5-gallon container of gasoline lying in the middle of the bed. That morning, Brett called Kai and explained what had happened. He was upset and even expressed his guilt, noting that he felt responsible for bringing his wife to this tragic end. In front of his co-workers, he maintained his CB by repeating the same details he shared with investigators. 2 days later, officers discovered Vash's diary in her car. On the last page was a handwritten letter and suicide note taken in for forensic examination. The forensic report determined Vash died instantly from a gunshot wound to the head. She also sustained gunshot wounds to her torso and thigh. Blood and lung tests were negative for smoke inhalation and carbon monoxide, normally present in fire victims. The burns on her body prevented the examiner from concluding if it was homicide or suicide. Despite Brett's threats about committing a perfect crime making it look like suicide to avoid punishment, things didn't go as planned. Police soon noticed inconsistencies in Brett's story. For instance, there were no signs of dirt, blood, or wounds on him. Another inconsistency was the position of the gun with its barrel pointing downward. This raised questions about the alleged suicide. David Fetty, a special agent with the Kansas Bureau of Investigation, questioned how the weapon ended up under the body. He confirmed that if Vash had shot herself in a horizontal position, the weapon would have fallen to the floor. If she had done it sitting up, it would have remained on the right side of the bed. Furthermore, the trajectory of the bullet did not support that Vash shot herself behind her right ear. Due to these discrepancies, David decided to dig deeper into the case. Further investigation led officers to discover documents detailing how to kill someone and make it look like suicide. While analyzing Vash's diary entry, they noticed a discrepancy in handwriting compared to her other entries. Forensic scientist Dennis McFarley concluded that the note was forged. Witnesses also reported seeing Bratt destroying hard drives a day before Vash's death. Testimony from a neighbor indicated hearing a fatal gunshot at 3:15 a.m., 45 minutes before Bratt called 911. This confirmed David Fetty's suspicions of foul play. On May 13, 2011, police arrested Brad. He was charged with first-degree premeditated murder and 2 additional charges of endangering his sons. Brendan and Bronson were subsequently placed in the care of Kathleen. During questioning, Brad described Vashi as not being the cheerful and balanced woman she portrayed herself to be. On the contrary, she suffered from insecurity and depression due to their rocky marriage and threats he made about taking the children away. Brad also added that after filing for divorce, Vashi felt deep depression and remorse. Consequently, she set a fire and shot herself. Despite these claims, police didn't believe him. The trial commenced on June 10, 2013. During opening statements, Deputy Attorney General Amy Haley presented her perspective to the jury and argued that no one knows better than a police officer that fire destroys evidence. When questioned about a projector, Brad stated he had used it to demonstrate to cadets how to create a fake security scenario through a real-life exercise. A forensic document examiner testified regarding the forged letter and burnt hard drives. Concerning these items, Brad claimed he destroyed them to protect his personal information, not because he needed to hide anything illicit. His attorney, Roger Falk, mentioned that Vashi had suffered from depression since high school and that her condition worsened with diet drug use. Brad's brother Robert also testified in court and supported his brother's claims by confirming that he had observed Vashi feeling depressed and sad in the 2 weeks leading up to her death. In contrast, another witness informed the jury that while Vashi indeed suffered from depression at the start of therapy, it was mainly due to the circumstances of her marriage rather than a clinical mental health issue. Recently, she had been feeling anxious about her future. The account from Rich Vash's brother echoed this sentiment, recounting the emotional turmoil in his nephews' lives. Their innocence had been shattered by Brett, leaving them deprived of the chance to get to know their parents better. Prors portrayed Brett as manipulative, claiming he used his law enforcement experience to distort facts. In response, the defense stuck to its version of the alleged suicide, highlighting that even a seasoned medical examiner couldn't determine who was at fault for the victim's death. Brett, meanwhile, portrayed himself as a loving husband and devoted father, weighed down by his wife's desire to separate. He also accused Kingman County District Judge Larry Solomoto of seeking publicity and launched into a tirade accusing the judge of seeking a ruling against him to gain a nomination to the Kansas Supreme Court. In the end, the jury found Brett guilty of premeditated murder. Judge Larry sentenced him to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years and added 6 years for other charges because they would be tried consecutively. So, Brett will be eligible for parole after more than 31 years. Judge Larry also considered that Brett did not plead guilty and lied to avoid responsibility and showed no remorse. In 2015, Brett appealed his conviction, but the Kansas Supreme Court denied his appeal and upheld the original conviction. Brendan and Bronson's uncertain future initiated a custody battle between maternal and paternal families. Kathleen filed for custody on grounds that she had already cared for them for 102 days. As neither party could reach an agreement, the custody decision was left to the judge. However, it's important to note that there's been no news yet on the outcome of this custody battle so far. Corpus Christi resident Kevin Davis strangled his mother before hitting her in the head with a hammer, splitting her skull. Davis then swirled her brain around before sexually assaulting her corpse. Davis was sentenced to life in prison for the crime of a mom who he described as the best. In 2014, Kevin Jasrell Davis argued with his mother, 50-year-old Kimberly Hill, in the Corpus Christi, TX, apartment he shared with her and his sister, Destiny. On May 26th, Davis called 911, reporting that he'd just murdered his mother. Once at the police station, an 18-year-old Davis vividly detailed the day's events, sometimes with a smirk on his face. What he told detectives was gruesome and shocking. Kevin admitted bashing in Hill's head with a hammer, swirling her brain around, and then sexually assaulting her corpse. On the morning of March 27, 2014, Davis, bored and frustrated with life, told his mother he did not like people and that he wanted to commit suicide. Obviously caught off guard by the statement, Hill allegedly told her son that she could not stop him, that was what he wanted to do. Kevin later told police hearing this from his mother enraged him. It was then he decided to take her life. As Hill sat on the couch in the living room, Davis came up behind her, attempting to strangle her with a cord. Hill began screaming. Kevin panicked, retrieved a hammer, and began bashing in his mother's skull. Davis struck his mother in the head with the hammer at least 20 times, splitting her skull in the process. Davis then retrieved a kitchen knife that he inserted inside his mother's head wound. He swirled her brain around to make sure she was dead, Kevin claimed, and then inserted his hand inside the wound. He would tell detectives during a taped interrogation that his mother's brain felt like putty. Kevin then dragged his mother's lifeless body to her bedroom and raped her corpse. When he finished the sadistic act, he went to a neighbor's house, saying he just killed someone and needed help. The neighbor dialed 911. Police arrested Davis without incident. At the police station, he made a full confession of the crime, giving details that even seasoned detectives found highly disturbing. Watch part of Kevin Davis's confession. During the interrogation, Davis told detectives that he originally planned on killing his sister, too, but changed his mind. He further admitted that he often fantasized about having sex with dead bodies. With a smirk on his face, Kevin also told the detective that he was a virgin before he raped his mother. He stated, "I guess I've lost my virginity to a corpse," as he gently laughed. What did Kimberly Hill do to warrant such a violent death? Nothing more into son murdering than sexually assaulting his mother, of course, and Kevin could not give detectives one good reason for the crime. According to Kevin, she was a great mom that did not deserve what he had done to her. He said that she was the best mother in the world, and went on to say, "I am a terrible, disgusting person." Kevin admitted that he had the best mother in the world, telling detectives that she did nothing to deserve what was done to her. He went on to say that he was a terrible, disgusting person. In reality, Kevin was a serial killer in the making, a psychopath who took sadistic pleasure in hurting other people. Although diagnosed by a psychologist with antisocial personality disorder, the doctor said he knew right from wrong when he brutally murdered and raped his mother. He readily admitted that he would kill again if ever released from prison. He also confessed to then fleeing the crime scene on his bicycle. Before he did that, though, he left several handwritten notes for the police, one of which read, "Chase me. Sorry for the mass. KD." But after a while, he decided against leaving town and called 911 to report his mother's killing and his crimes. Despite admitting to the murder and making a videotaped confession, Kevin Davis pleaded not guilty to the charges in court. He later changed the plea. Davis smiled at the jury as they sentenced him to life in prison. He serves his time at the Jester 4 facility in Richmond, Texas, and is eligible for parole in March 2044. Story number 2. Story of the Killer Priest. We will be exploring the story of a killer. A priest that seemed to be normal, nothing strange or nothing weird about him, however, he did have a dark side. It turns out that not only was he a pervert, but he was manipulating people as he saw fit, especially women, and now without further ado, let's dive into the story of Guy Desnoyers. We're going back in time in the 50s in France, and we need to take note that the church at that time had a very important place in people's lives, especially in the countryside. The priests were almost as important as the mayors because they were representing a type of moral authority that many people listened to, and this was the case in the small village of Europe where this story took place. a town that had about 400 villagers. Guy Neuer was born on the countryside, and his family was very Catholic. They raised him so that he can have a career in religion as a priest, and even if that was not his first choice, that is exactly what he became. It is in 1950 that Guy became a priest at the Church of Europe. In appearance, this young man looked like the ideal priest. He was nice, friendly, kind, and very dynamic. Anything linked to religion, he did it very, very well. He had a lot of great ideas to help the village grow. He created a choir, a group to play in a theater piece. He get organized multiple excursions for the kids, and he was known to have created a soccer team for the boys of the village. The older people thought that it was very modern for him to bring all these items to the village, and the younger generation thought it was pretty amazing and appreciated the modern aspect that he brought to the town and to the religion. Neuer was apparently also a beautiful man, and the ladies found him very charming. Now, as I have mentioned at the beginning, underneath this whole angelic disguise, Guy was actually hiding a dark secret, his personality. He had a thirst for carnal pleasure, and he was using his charm to get closer to the ladies. After a lot of perversity and manipulation, a lot of the women actually gave in, and none of the women spoke as they were afraid that no one would believe them and did not want to be seen as the shame of the village. It is in 1953 that things took a different turn for Guy Neuer. An incident happened that changed the plan of the priest. A 16-year-old girl fell for his charm, and guess what happened? She became pregnant. Now, of course, the priest denies everything, and he says that he is not the father. He threatens the girl and says that if she does not stop, he will file a complaint for defamation. Now, having a high influence in the village, Guy says that this is nonsense and it is impossible for him to be the father, and of course, having such an high influence, his followers believed him. He was even summoned in front of his superior, the bishop, to which he lied to you and denied the whole thing, and of course, this whole situation was shut down. In reality, he was actually the father, and he actually took the girl to another village to give birth, where he convinced her to give away the child, and of course that story was never heard of or told to the villagers, or we could say, maybe presume, that if people knew, they decided not to say anything because the priest had such a high influence on the villagers that they did not want to go against him. Once the story died, Guy went back to his normal ways and kept manipulating the people like he did before, but there was another incident in 1956. Regine Faze, 19 years of age, got pregnant, and again by Guy Neuer. Contrary to the other women, Regine did not want to give away her child for adoption. Not only that, but she wanted to raise him in the village of the Europe where the priest was. Guy was terrified, and he was afraid that eventually the child would grow up and resemble him. He was also afraid that this woman would actually speak eventually. Speaking of which, in 1956 rumors started to make surface. A lot of parishioners were becoming pregnant in mysterious ways, and no one knew who the father was. The priest then starts to think about a plan and asks a military man from another village to come to town and pretend that he was the father. Unfortunately, that strategy did not work out, and no one believed the soldier was the father. That only made things worse for the mysterious pregnancies. December 3rd, 1956 is a date that changed everything for the priest. Guy brings Regine in on a deserted road to try and convince her one more time to give up the child. She refuses again, and she was tired of the priest's requests, so you know what she did? She got out of the car and started to walk back the opposite way back to the village. At night, Guy Neuer got out of the car and pulled out a 6.35 caliber pistol and fired 3 shots. The 3 shot hit Regine in the back of the neck, then she died on the spot. Once the crime committed, the priest walked to the victim, undressed her, and took out a knife and started to open Regine's stomach. From her stomach, he removed the baby girl that was still alive. The priest committed again an act that cannot be forgiven. He strangled the baby, stabbed it, disfigured it, and he did all the thinking to himself that, if the baby is massacred that way, there would be no way, no DNA, if you want to call it that way, no DNA to trace the baby back to him. The disappearance of Regine was actually reported in the evening, and the weird part is that the priest joined the search party to find Regine. Can you imagine that situation? I mean, the killer is with you in the search party trying to find the person that he just murdered. Is it just me, or that is just like Twisted? The body was found very quickly, and because the priest was not an assassin, he didn't, think about cleaning up the crime scene, so it didn't take long for the cops to find the murder weapon, and they found the weapon casing that linked back to the priest. So the priest is now a suspect, and when asked during the interrogation, the priest denied everything. However, because of all the pressure he was getting, he just cracked and admitted everything. Now that story came out and everyone was devastated in France because he is now a criminal, and the church asked for Guy to be locked up with a false name so that it would not affect the church, and also the main reason was to make sure that the crime was not associated to the church. The court addressed the case of Guy Desnoyers on January 24, 1958. Of course, the villagers and the public opinion wanted the priest to be sentenced to death. The life of Guy was defined as a person that did enjoy luxury, sexual relations, and admired his own authority, and on his side, the priest was asking forgiveness because he had no clue what he did wrong. The jury did provide their verdict, and for most, they said that he was guilty of double murder. Of course, there was Regine and the baby. However, they did not want to sentence him to death. The jury did not want to send someone associated to the church to the scaffold. The priest Guy Desnoyers was therefore sentenced to perpetrated work. Now that situation raised a lot of questions regarding the responsibility of the Catholic Church, and this is still a question that is being asked nowadays, especially for the priests who like other kids, if you know what I mean. There was an investigation that was done, and the report came up saying that the church knew the dark side that he was hiding before he was pronounced priest. His superiors noticed that he did not have a lot of faith, and he was not really a believer in Catholic religion. The investigation did show that before being priest in Europe, he was sent to Plymouth. While he was there, he did have a sexual relation with his parishioner, and instead of removing his status, they just transferred him to another city. Even there, his weakness for women did not stop, as he did have multiple sexual relations. You would think that the church would revoke his status, but instead he was just transferred to Europe, where the church was isolated and his temptations might be lower. But as we have seen, this was not the case. Desnoyers was released in 1972. After being detained for 22 years, he was the oldest prisoner of France. Once again, the church came to his help after he was released from prison. He was welcome in a monastery in Brittany, where he stayed there until he died on April 21, 2010, at 90 years of age. Now we go to story number 3. Family slaughtered at Wellsgrave Provincial Park. The killer stalked the family while he let his violent fantasies run wild. 3 generations of a family left to go camping on August 2, 1982. They set up camp in the Wellsgrave Provincial Park, located roughly 120 kilometers north of Kamloops in central British Columbia. They enjoyed several days of quality family time, picking berries during the day and gathering around the fire at night, having no idea that they were being stalked by a killer. Among the campers was grandparents Edith, 59, and George Bentley, aged 66, their daughter Jackie, 41, and son-in-law Bob Johnson, 44. Also the Johnsons' daughters Janet, 13, and Karen, just 11. The Johnsons drove up with their daughters and pitched a tent for the girls. The grandparents brought a truck and camper where the adults would stay. The last anyone heard from the family was on August 6th, when Edith called another daughter. It would not be until August 23rd that the family would first be reported missing. Bob Johnson was due back at work on August 16th, but didn't show. After a week with no word from him, his company filed a missing persons case with the police. In spite of an extensive search, it didn't result in finding any of the family members. The biggest problems were the killer had a head start. With plenty of time to kill, get rid of the victims' bodies, and cover his tracks. The other, maybe even bigger obstacle was, no one knew exactly where the family was camping at. All anyone knew was that the family was camping in the Wellsgrave area, which is massive. They had no idea where to even start, let alone being able to follow a trail to find the family. It would take 3 more weeks and a mushroom picker to find the family. On September 13th, the current discovery of the Johnsons' 1979 Plymouth was found. It had been burned beyond recognition as it set off to the side of a mountainside logging road. The car held the bodies of the 4 adults in the back seat and the 2 young girls in the trunk. The bodies were burnt so thoroughly that when it came time to bury the family, they were all placed together in one child-sized casket. Through a forensic examination of the remains, It was determined they had been shot with a .22 caliber firearm. Locals were able to tell investigators where they had seen the family camped at. An examination of the area would turn up .22 casings, which helped identify the weapon used as a Remington pump-action rifle. What wasn't at the campsite was the truck and camper, the boat and camping gear brought with the family, or any trace of the family at all. With no suspect in custody or even in sight, the media was pushing for answers. A tip came in that the family's truck and camper had been spotted. The witnesses said it was being driven by 2 French Canadians in central Canada. The media sprang into action, throwing this up as their headline and demanding the killers to be caught. In April, with still no leads, the investigators knew they needed to get creative. They reenacted what they believed was the crime scene for TV cameras and aired it across Canada. The next month, the police drove a replica Ford camper truck to Ontario and Quebec in an attempt to draw awareness for what people should be looking out for. What it did instead was flood the investigators with over 13,000 tips and sightings of the replica vehicle. The reward was raised from $7,500 to $10,000 for information leading to the truck. None of the tips led to the discovery of the camper and truck. It would be found by sheer luck. 2 forestry employees were working on a logging road and stumbled across it. The camper had sat there on Trophy Mountain for 14 months, only a few kilometers away from the crime scene. The camper was burned out like the car holding the family's bodies. This left the authorities to believe they were looking for someone local to the Wells Gray area, and not 2 French Canadians as they had been searching for, since it was more likely that a local would know about the logging roads in the area in general. Taking a closer look at the person who lived closest to the crime scene led them back to David William Shearing, 24. They had received a tip about him earlier in the investigation. When they followed up, the tipster had quite a bit to tell them. I hear earlier Shearing had asked him about re-registering a Ford truck and how to repair a hole in its door. This was a tip that the police had never divulged. After finding the truck, it had a bullet hole in the door. After an interrogation by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, Shearing confessed. He went so far as reenacting the murders for the detectives. He turned over evidence that he had stolen from the family and the murder weapon, the .22 caliber Remington rifle. The ballistic test would prove that this was the weapon used to kill the family. The same weapon that had been hanging on his wall the very first time the authorities went to ask him about the family, right after they had been reported missing. Maybe it was because his father was a prison guard while his brother was a sheriff. But Shearing wasn't suspected when first interviewed. In his confession, he gave details of how it all happened. He had first noticed the family when he set up camp, fixating on the 2 young girls. Then over the next few days, he watched their every move. On the night of August 10th, Shearing watched as the adults sat around the campfire and had seen the girls go into their tent for the night. From a distance, he took out the 4 adults with sniper shots. He said he then killed the 2 girls in their tent as they slept. After, he said he loaded all the bodies into the car and moved it to the logging road, then set it on fire with 5 gallons of gasoline. He then cleaned up the campground, removing the family's possessions, including the camper and truck. It would only be later that he'd burned these, as he was unable to transfer them into his name. He claimed that he killed the family because he wanted to rob them of their possessions. It wouldn't be until after Shearing was convicted that he gave his full confession of how he had been stalking the family. It was the girls that he fantasized about having sex with that kept him interested. That's why, after telling the adults, he kidnapped the girls and took them to his property nearby. There he raped and terrorized them for over a week. On August 16th, the day their father was due back at work, Shearing took Taryn away from her big sister. Once alone, he shot the girl in the back of the head. Janet would be left alive for one more day of torture before she would be killed like her sister. With the girls now dead, he took their bodies to the Johnsons' car where the other family members had been placed. He had actually only hidden the car in some bush. He put the girls in the trunk and got into the driver's seat with the 4 decomposing adult bodies in the back seat, driving it to its final resting place where it would be found by that mushroom picker burned out. David Shearing pled guilty to 6 counts of murder. Shearing was sentenced to life in prison with no eligibility for parole for 25 years. The maximum penalty for second-degree murder. This would be the first time that this sentence was handed out in Canadian history. David Shearing, who changed his last name to his mother's maiden name of Ennis, was first eligible for parole in 2008. The National Parole Board ruled against his release, citing that he was still having violent sexual fantasies and had not completed his sex offender treatment program, so he was not ready to be released. Again in 2012, he was turned down for parole, applying again in 2014, but before his hearing, he withdrew his request. The National Parole Board has also been given a petition which has over 15,000 signatures, advocating for the violent offender to never be released. In his own words at one of his parole hearings, David tries to plea for freedom, saying this about himself: "I was very selfish." He is supported by his wife, that he married while in prison, Heather,